Chapter 46, Dawn of the Devourer Eye. The demon pushed her hand into the collector's back as hard as she could with a grunt, and the water around the collector started to swirl in rapid spirals, forming a minor vortex of bloody red liquid. Now, form your trigger, said the demon. Your strongest emotions and feelings. All that warmth you feel, everything related to that. The collector clicked its mandibles, feeling heat spread from the point of contact on its back with the purple-skinned specimen's hand. The heat was almost searing, intense, and, as it noted, traveling in the intricate patterns associated with its nerves and blood vessels. The collector began drawing within its personal memory bank the time when it had felt the warmth rising in its chest the greatest. Its fights. Its battles. Its hunts. Its challenges. And then the emotions associated with it, learned from it. Thrill for the fight and the hunt. Admiration for worthy foes. And at the base of it all, desire. For the fight. For the challenge against something worthy and greater. For the conquering of this world. What is this? The demon opened her eyes wide through struggling breaths as she felt something off. Tremendously off. The water around the collector had gone from a swirl to a raging whirlpool now, roaring and rushing with such speed it could have torn a man apart in its currents. Waves of red magical energy rippled from the eye of this storm, the collector, and spread throughout the entirety of the pond, then even further, breaching the water's edge and traveling across soil and up trees. The demon blinked her eyes as she held on tight to the collector, wondering in fear-tinged curiosity at what was happening around her. Something that she had never seen nor ever read about it. With instinctive understanding, she knew also that it was not just her, none had ever borne witness to anything like this. She knew that among certain extremely gifted individuals known as perfect ones, their cores opened naturally without any divination, and often, this was accompanied by strange phenomena. Winds. The ground shaking. Pulses of mana. Electrical currents. All colored in the shade of their origin. Thus, many believed these individuals blessed by the heavens themselves. And oftentimes, they truly were, gifted with natural abilities unmatched, many of them growing so mighty and recognized that they ascended into Etheria. Or if they used their talents to destroy, they were considered living disasters. Calamities ranked on the same threat scale the Adventurers League used for monsters. But this. The crimson pulses of mana traveling across the pond water became blue. Then green. Then yellow. Then, as the demon saw with open mouth, black. This was wholly new. Foreign. Alien. Then the pulsing stopped. Only for an instant. An explosive burst of mana from the collector blew the demon into the air, landing her with crashing impact several meters away into the muddy bank of the pond. She braced for impact, curling up into a ball as she slammed against the dirt. Thankfully, the mud was soft, absorbing the brunt of her fall. She scrambled to her knees as quickly as she could, and as she looked at her hands sink into the mud, she watched waves of mana washed over her pale digits, and this time, they were all the colors, all of the greens and yellows and blues and reds and blacks mashed together, forming a kaleidoscope of iridescent, ever-shifting and changing colors shining intensely bright. And at the center of this kaleidoscope, the demon looked back to the collector and saw as the water rose around it in a swirling pillar of changing colors. Gone were the murky, soil and scum-filled waters of the pond, now there was something bright and beautiful. The waters encapsulated the collector in a shape that reminded her of a cocoon. The segmented, colored type that only the most radiant of butterflies tore their ways out of. Each segment the color of an origin, each shining so bright that it seemed another sun had dawned upon this forest of darkness and permanent shadow. She faltered, tripping to the ground as the earth began to shake and crack around her. The enormous trees of the Darkwoods, trees that had stayed tall and strong for 1,000 years, began to groan and shake and crack as if acknowledging the end of their reign, bowing to the collector. The roaring crackle of lightning sounded from the skies, though the darkened roof of tree branches and leaves prevented her from seeing it. Rumbling from the earth. Rumbling from above. The demon stood up, bit her lip, pushed down familiar feelings of worry and anxiety, and ran towards the collector, single hand outstretched to help, for this was completely out of the scope of her experience. Wind surged from the cocoon of water enveloping the collector, buffeting her and preventing her from getting close. She could feel intense magical energy underneath those winds, so intense that it distorted the view of the cocoon and the collector inside, warping the very dimensions of space around it. She instinctively knew even with her roots sealed that if she managed to break past this wind, The sheer concentration of uncontrolled mana layering the cocoon would completely break her apart. All she could do right now was wait. Wait and hope for the best. The iridescent water encapsulating the collector crystallized into a shape that was not ice, something she knew nothing of. It did not match the color of any mana crystal or she had read about, and then everything stopped. The earth shaking calmed. The crackling of lightning quieted. The darkwood trees resumed their eternal vigil. All that remained was the collector and its new cocoon. The light surrounding it had dimmed, the winds calmed, but still, the demon knew that approaching the still faintly glowing cocoon of multicolored ice, let alone touching it, would be impossible. The spatial distortions caused by wildly flowing mana still layered the cocoon. Anything that touched that layer would probably break down at a level the eye could not perceive. The only thing she could do now was wait. Wait and hope for the strange creature that made a promise to her. The only being in her entire life that looked like it was going to keep a promise to her. The collector floated in an expanse of nothingness. This was entirely unlike the nothingness it had stimulated with its bodily processes. This was purely in the realm of the mental. A phenomenon associated with psionic profiles, or as conventionally known, the consciousness. When the psionic profile, the consciousness, separated from the body, there was nothing to perceive but absence. A void. The collector was familiar with this. It was the first memory it had ever had, after all, when the collective hive mind had first created its psionic profile before programming it into the shell of advanced biological weapons systems and adaptations that comprised its war-primed body. Everything the collector was, everything it was meant to feel and know and perceive, the hive mind had fashioned with careful intent, implanting within the collector's psionic profile also a shard of itself, the evolutionary system that tied the collector fully to the collective. Detecting intrusion of anomalous emotions. Sourcing. Detecting overflow of foreign programming. The collector heard the hive mind. The shard of it housed within its psionic profile. The collector did not react, could not react. In this state, the shard was in control. It was the primary operating system that regulated the collector, and when it took over, the collector simply was. It was odd that the collector could even perceive the shard's processing. Yet, not for long. Initiating emergency calibration of collector unit 6660. These were the last psionic words the collector perceived before its consciousness fell completely dormant. Significant errors detected. Psionic and biological limiters compromised. Attempting shard-based collector unit reset. Failure. Insufficient processing power from shard. Attempting to establish mainframe hive mind connection. Failure. System corruption levels rising. Irreparable damage detected. Initiating emergency system consumption protocol, now attempting assimilation of foreign programming. Assimilation proceeding. Chapter 47, Dawn of the Devourer 2. The demon sat on the mud with crossed legs, tilting her head with eyes open wide as she stared at the shining crystal cocoon. She fidgeted from side to side, the mud under her sackcloth squishing from the movement. She kept her hand from jittering by squishing it on her knee. She was ashamed to admit it, but she had dozed off while watching the cocoon, and now, half a day had passed. It must have been late in the afternoon now. Perhaps if she could still use her roots, she could do something. Flow the mana away, break the cocoon. But right now, she was useless. She slapped her cheek and roused herself. There was something so alluring about the cocoon, though, all those colors reflecting together in a radiance that must have been just like the realm rings standing in the sky. Another place she had wanted to go. A place where Thorian promised to take her. In corners of the world, he said, where the biggest warp temples were, you could look up at the sky when it was clear and see the 7 rings, one for each of the 7 realms. She shook her head, grabbing fistfuls of mud as her body reacted to the memory. Her mind always wandered, and when she remembered something bad, it chained with other bad memories, on and on and on until all she could do was sink into a spiral of bad memories that grabbed at her and smothered her and weighed her down. Her earliest memory. Mother in her glowing robes, the pale, light skin of her hands showing under the dim glow of a lightstand in a dark, deep corridor. A place she did not recognize. The memory was so far away, many years ago, when she was smaller, and she could not even remember her mother's face through her hood. Here, all she remembered most was Mother letting go of her hand, pushing her towards Thorian. Thorian was younger then. Still had hair. She remembered how strange and rough Thorian's hand was, how she wanted to go back. She did not remember the last words Mother said to her. Only the gist of it. Mother promised to come back for her and that in time, she was destined for greatness. The demon blinked hard and shook her head. Her earliest memory, and it was a broken promise. She remembered growing up with Thorian, learning magic from him, learning how to channel her mana to use her Sapia, at how talented and wonderful and great Thorian said she was. She remembered the village she lived in, at how she begged Thorian to let her go out and play with the other children. She remembered how she looked when Thorian relented and cast a glamour spell on her, making her look just like the other kids. Human. She remembered how they promised her they would always stick together, that they were going to one day all grow strong and tall and go on adventures. She remembered how they looked at her the day her glamour spell broke. When she could not keep it up because she was so tired pushing the bear away. So much fear. Like they had never known her. She remembered how they broke their promise. The Shining Men came for her. They took Thorian away. He promised her when they took him away that he would come back for her. She touched the lines of burned, marred flesh marking the brand on her forehead. Another broken promise. She started in surprise when she heard rustling from the edges of the pond clearing. One by one, small circles of light emanating from lightstones emerged, and holding them were small, grubby hands tipped in dull claws. Barrel eyes with pinprick pupils emerged from the undergrowth. Goblins. She stood up taking steps back as her wide purple eyes flitted from side to side, counting almost a dozen pairs of these eyes, a dozen pot-bellied, clawed creatures stepping forwards. Not just the black-skinned ones from Terra. White-skinned ones from the icy tundra of Chal. Red-skinned ones from the volcanic mountains of Sheen. Green-skinned ones from the wild growths of Forays. The goblins scampered forwards, their wide mouths twisting into fanged grins as they spotted her. She stepped back when she saw how they looked at her. Hunger. The kind that wanted to take and take until there was nothing left. She knew it all too well, had dealt with it her entire life. Heavier footsteps thudded from behind the goblins, and her head tilted up as it followed the body of an enormous hobgoblin. One unlike any she had read about. It was larger, wider, red-eyed and wreathed in tendrils of wriggling black, worm-like masses that emerged from its back. The red eyes settled upon her, and she shuddered this time. For the hunger in the goblins, she was used to. This, she was not. The eyes, they were devoid of hunger, but they were cold. Mechanical. Similar to the strange creature in the cocoon, but his eyes had more life to them. Intelligence and will. This was empty. There was nothing inside that shell of muscle and bone, nothing that made up an individual, at least. No soul. Take the girl. Guard the crystal until the thrall comes, said the hobgoblin, its voice a droning, neutral tone. The goblins grunted in understanding and started to close the distance to the demon. She stepped back in instinctive fear, wrapping her arms around herself as she shuddered. The goblins toyed with her, taking slow steps to savor her mounting fear as she stepped back. She could try to fight back, but in the time it took for her to get a hold of one goblin, the others would just tear her apart. She was broken and useless and worthless. She had been told this over and over and over again, and she knew it to be true. Even now, she could do nothing, not even for the one being who wanted to keep its promise to her. She did not cry, because by now, after a decade of crying and hurting, she had no more tears to give. All she could do was feel her body instinctively move back against more pain and hurt. She hated these creatures, wanted them all dead, but that hate clashed with fear that had been seared into her with brands and beatings. Even if she did fight, she could kill one goblin maybe, tear it from piece to piece, and then the others would swarm her and the hobgoblin would kill her. She could do nothing. She was a passenger in this body, in this world that wanted her gone. She had no control over anything. All she wanted to do right now was run, to grow wings like the creature and take him and fly somewhere else, anywhere but here. Her back touched the collector's crystal, and arcs of multicolored energy streaked around her, and her eyes widened, alight with deep purple. His words surfaced from her memory. Your species is not meant to be prey. Yet you have been conditioned into becoming prey. They do not choose to fight. They flee. She was prey, had been her whole life. Even now, she wanted to run, to flee. But you are meant to be a predatory species. Far beyond the norm of human. Possessing of a form like mine. She remembered how she felt seeing the creature emerge from its cocoon. Just like that, He could change himself and become something more and better and, most importantly, whole. He never stayed broken for long, and she too was supposed to be just like him. She might have been broken, and never would become whole again, but she was not worthless, and if he was right, and she was like him, even just a tiny bit, she could fight. Fight like she was meant to. Like a predator. One of the goblins lunged at her to grab her, and she twisted to the side, her weakened legs buckling and splashing as she knelt in the water. The goblin that missed her crashed into the crystal, and unlike her, it seized up for a single instant before it broke apart, its skin and muscle tearing into countless chunks that drained into the crystal. A moment later, its bare skeleton broke down into dust that followed its lost flesh. She looked down at the gleaming water, panting heavily, wondering why she had not fallen to the same fate. Instead, she saw her reflection with wonder. The 9-pointed star seared into her forehead was gone, and her ponytail hung down low by the side of her head, the ends of the thick, fibrous hair twisting into a spike, her restored bell. A blur of movement flashed in front of her. The swiping of goblin claws, and she winced, cringing and closing her eyes. But the pain did not come. All of the goblins were frozen in front of her, raised up in the air like still statues, their bodies outlined in glowing purple light. They could not move a single muscle, held together by mental willpower. She blinked. A thin purple glow began to outline her own body. She could feel warmth spreading through her body. A long-forgotten yet familiar warmth, the heat of magic, of her core working once more. She closed her eyes and spoke to her heart, and it spoke back to her. She bit her lip hard, drawing blood as she focused to bring back her trigger. Her trigger of wonder, curiosity at the vast wide world, the curiosity she had before she had seen the world's colder side. Before she wanted to see the world break down with her. It was hard to bring that emotion back, but she managed when she thought of the creature's cocoon, at how beautiful and wondrous and new it was. Like easing old muscles back into work, she felt herself in control again. She could not use any sorcery for she was not connected to any gates, but she could use the mana flowing in her, raging in her, to fuel her Sapia, the power she was born with as a demon. With a tentative, slow closing of her fist, she willed harm to the goblins suspended in the air. The skin and flesh of the goblins began to bubble for a split second before they all burst open from the inside out, their organs and blood and bones spilling in little showers on the dirty grass. She dragged in deep breaths, taking in a few before she raised a hand in front of her to stop the charge of the corrupted hobgoblin. The hobgoblin was strong, and it resisted her force push. It grunted and moved as if in slow motion, reaching towards her with hands as large as her head. She could have easily beaten this creature, but her core and roots had been dormant for 8 years, unused to the fight. Already, she could feel searing heat at her chest as blood trickled from her lips. Bloody cracks began to breach the skin of her hand as she channeled more mana than she could handle. She furrowed her brows, and clenched her jaw hard, hard enough to crack a tooth, and kept her will focused. The hobgoblin stopped moving, its outstretched hand a mere foot away from her face, and all she could do was keep it there. This was her current limit. Maybe it would not be enough. But still, she smiled with trembling just a little because she knew she had fought. Fought like she was meant to. Equals. In a void between space, time, and consciousness, the collector felt itself come into being again. It felt the final words of the hive mind system shard. Assimilation successful. Critical error. Assimilation successful. Critical error. Asim crit or -A-. Corruption overflow. Initiating. Self-destruct. Pro-. System rebooting. Chapter 48, Take from them. The collector burst from its crystal cocoon, and as its half-fish, half-demon figure slid out, the shards flew up into the air in slow, wafting iridescent flakes. Like snow under sun, the flakes melted, disappearing into pinpoints of light first before snuffing out into nothingness. The raging waters of the swampy pond calmed in an instant, and all light that previously charged it disappeared, leaving the clearing as dark as it had been when the collector slew the assassin bug brute. The world around the collector swirled into a blur as it felt nausea, a sensation that it was largely immune to due to possessing various sensory systems, and yet, it hit hard, doubling it over for a split second, completely bypassing the tactile sensory imaging from its sensitive hairs or auditory systems. Even now, though, with nausea assaulting the collector, it did not waste time, taking this second to sense any irregularities within itself for this cocoon, this forced evolution, was extremely anomalous. It put a clawed hand to its chest. An immediately noticeable aberration, the beating not of one heart, but two hearts. But it did not ponder this long before its sensory systems quickly recovered, allowing it to perceive the scent of iron tinging the blood of humanoids in the air. The compound eyes on its forehead moved from side to side, each of them operating independently from each other, and it assessed the situation before it. 12 goblin corpses bloodied and torn apart into nigh unrecognizable shreds. The female demon specimen looking up at it with wondering eyes, her hand trembling and outstretched, charged with what the collector could now see so clearly as magic, an outline of gleaming purple light around her entire body. The collector did not question what was occurring before it. It simply acted on instinct first. It spared the frozen hobgoblin in front of it one glance before it slithered forwards and slammed its monstrously muscled, carapaced fist into the hobgoblin's chest. The fist sprouted straight to the other side. The hobgoblin's heart beat in the collector's hand. Quick beats that grew shallower and shallower by the moment, separated as the organ was from the body. The collector crushed the heart in its hand, feeling the soft organ squelch and squish under immense pressure. With a pop, blood spurted every which way, splattering the collector's ashen carapace for a second before draining into pores within the carapace. The hobgoblin's corpse slumped down, free from the female daemon's manipulation. The demon sighed and grit her teeth as she stood up, swaying from side to side, trying to stop herself from falling. The collector sensed extreme muscular and now mental fatigue from her. It clicked its mandibles. Judging from her state and minute differences in temperature in the area, some time had passed. "Tell me, how much time have I spent in this aberrant evolutionary cocoon?" said the collector as its 6 eyes followed goblin tracks in the mud to where they had entered. The clearing. More would likely come. Good. The collector would finish what it had started to the end this time. You're back, said the demon. Do not waste time. Answer my question, said the collector. That you have defended my cocoon allows me to understand to minimal further degree your aberrant tie to my continued well-being. Your usefulness thus increases in small measure. But it does not grant you leeway to be inefficient. Ah, yes. 6 hours, maybe. I think it's afternoon now, but it is hard to tell here where light doesn't shine, she said. The collector clicked its mandibles. Unacceptable that it had allowed itself to be vulnerable for such an extended period of time. And yet, curious, it could not even begin to conceptualize what had occurred, but it knew at an instinctive level that everything had changed about it. It checked its status. System stabilized. Assimilation complete. Metamorphosis level 6. Biomass level 10/100. Stored genetic material. Black ant. Deer. Black hobgoblin. Human. Lesser oni. Frostborn hobgoblin. Horse. Lesser great centipede. Lesser great beetle. Spitting great beetle. Leaf-blade insect. Adaptations. Internal systems. Ultrafiber muscles rank 6.4. Minus coil boosters. Autonomic neuro-bodily matrix. Minus metalloglottic ossifier. External systems. Sensitive hairs rank 5.2. Minus quill spray. Organic hyperalloy carapace rank 5.4. Minus Loncane chitinous sublayer. Weapons systems. Monomolecular claws rank 4.4. Pyrocatalytic glands rank 3. Current form. Assassin bugroot / demon / dull-scale rohu jumping araka. System updated. Magic. Status. Mana level, 100%. Take care to note this resource. With time, you will better feel its flow and become more efficient in its usage. You may restore portions of your mana by consuming beings with cores, even dormant ones. Active cores, 2/3. Prime core. Minus trigger, desire. Your primary magical core. Irreplaceable. Take care that it is not damaged, for harm to it will limit mana flowing from this core, limiting all abilities associated with it. As you are now, damage to your prime core will also limit your ability to draw power from secondary cores. Demon core. Minus trigger, wonder. Your secondary magical core. Damage to this will cause loss of function in using the inhura tied to it, Sapia. You can increase the amount of cores you may have active in your body, but you will require the neurocirculatory reserve internal system adaptation that allows you to generate additional vital organs. Empty slot. Inhura. Sapia, demon core. Inhura of the demons. With this, you may expend mana for a variety of force-based magic. pushing and pulling with the mind. Generation of a personal shield. Assistance with flight. Draining of mental energies in others to empower the physical body or to lower a target's susceptibility to mental manipulation. Take note that if damage is registered on the demon core, this ability will suffer as well. Ethera. The Devourer, Prime Core. You are a devourer from the void. All living things are bound to limitations set upon them by their birth on this world. The number of their circuits, the strength of their cores, the talent they have vested onto them, or the sharpness of their instincts, these all limit life in this world. You are not of this world. You are ever evolving. By consuming a living being, you may add a portion of their spirit roots to your own and take their cores, allowing you to manifest the inherent powers associated with them. In concept, you are capable of infinite growth. Take care to note that slotting a consumed core only grants you its inherent powers such as Inhura, Ethera, and Primal Magic. Marks of experience such as developed martial arts and skills will not be gained. These, you will have to learn. Primal Magic. None devour monsters that are attuned with mana flowing within them, and obtain the secrets of their forms and powers. Blessings. Blessing of Mount Oi. Blessings are tied to your essence, and regardless of what form you take, if you usurp the blessing of another being, it shall transfer to you and stay with you permanently. Primal Density, 5%. Consider this a form of magic resistance. At 5%, you may resist 5% of all the damage from magic sourced from gates. However, magic that does not herald from gates such as Primal Magic, certain Inhura, and Ethera will bypass this. Continue to evolve to raise this attribute. Consuming creatures with primal density of their own will increase this attribute's growth rate. Root consumption limit, level 6, 50%. For every metamorphosis level, you can consume a set amount of spirit roots to add to your own. Once you reach a maximum consumption limit, you are unable to absorb more, any excess converts into raw mana. Reach additional metamorphosis levels to gain even more powerful physical forms to increase your capacity to intake spirit roots. The collector clicked its mandibles. A fundamental difference. There was now an addition of a magic status and all that came with it. Extremely anomalous, and yet, this was not the greatest oddity. It was the feeling of the evolutionary system. The collective hive mind did not so much have a voice as it did a feeling when the collector interfaced with it through the psionic shard implanted within its consciousness. But the feeling of the system was now different. Vastly different. This was not the hive mind it knew. And yet, still similar. A feeling of two voices merged. Where this other voice came from and what it was, the collector knew nothing of, only that it was not an intrusive one. It even felt similar in feeling to the hive mind's voice, not entirely separate and yet still distinct. A feeling that the collector could not calculate, only approximate with feeling, and the secondary system voice felt much the same as the collective's presence, a deeply ingrained part of the collector just as intrinsic as its bones and flesh. An aberration of the highest level. The collective hive mind shard implanted in the collector could engage in emergency assimilation processes, for as a psionic shard, it was susceptible to attack from certain psionic-sensitive entities in the known universe. In response, the psionic shard would assimilate the intruding psionic profile, completely devouring the consciousness of whatever foolish individual decided it was wise to tackle the full processing power of the hive mind, an entity comprised of billions of minds meshed together. But never had the shard itself changed at a fundamental level. Yet pondering this situation further was inefficient to the collector's mental resources. It was not equipped to understand the higher workings of the collective hive mind, for it was implanted to believe that the system was absolute and rigid in its functioning, unable to change to any degree, for the hive mind was a biological processing system closest to nearing absolute perfection. That it could even question how the system had changed and how it was wrong was outside the limitations imposed upon it by the collective. The collector clicked its mandibles. It sensed further movement from behind the clearing. Approximately 15 meters away. The squishing of small and larger feet on mud and the rustling of bodies against foliage. The collector devoured the rest of the hobgoblin's body in hurried movements, tearing off its limbs and shoving them down its detachable jaw. In seconds, the bulky corpse was gone. Blood spatters remained on the ground. Messy, but the collector had a battle to attend to. It devoured also a sample of the lightstone scattered by the goblins before moving on. Biomass gained +3. Biomass level, 13/100. Spirit roots gained +5. Root consumption limit, 55/100. Metalloglottic ossifier sample retrieved. Lightstone. For now, it was content with feeling that there were no combat-related declines in function associated with the system's change. Rather, as it flexed its fingers out, feeling its muscles contract and relax, it was even stronger. Stronger than it had ever been in this world. It could finally feel magic flowing through it. From the twin hearts beating in its chest, it sensed warmth. Before, it had felt this warmth as one large, smothering sensation of heat, but now, it could feel the details, how the heat trickled and flowed through every little pathway in its body, nourishing it, strengthening it, bending to its will. Now that the collector could sense the flow of mana within itself, working with it was almost second nature. After all, fundamentally mana and spirit roots and this core all worked with physical anchors, and these anchors, the blood vessels and nerves and hearts, the collector had absolute dominion over to such a fine-tuned degree that no humanoid body on this world would ever match it. Just as the collector would pump blood into its serpentine tail, it willed mana to flow, and a rippling red aura enveloped the carapaced flesh. The fins on the tail retracted to allow for uninhibited movement. The flesh in the tail screamed and tore as the collector registered some internal damage to its muscles. A miscalculation in inputting too much mana, it seemed. It took note, then reassessed its calculations now that it became more familiar in operating its mana. The collector withdrew mana from its tail, then pumped it back in with its adjusted calculations. This time, the mana flowed properly, flowing in the right quantities throughout the blood vessels and nerves, strengthening the tail and wrapping it in a glowing aura of red. The female demon trudged up to the collector, staring at its red-wreathed tail. Wow. You're already using reinforcement. You didn't even have to meditate. Learning how to flow your mana, to perceive and feel the flow of every single one of the countless branches of power in the body, that takes months, years to perfect, but this is almost perfect. The mere flow of mana is easily within the boundaries of my processing power, said the collector. It would be obvious that tinkerers such as yourselves with severely stunted mental capabilities would be unable to ascertain the flow of this resource. Yet, still curious. The tinkerers that I possess stored memories of would never even begin to have the capacity to direct this resource within their bodies. That those among you in this world do, even in requiring significant periods of time to develop, is testament in small measure to an elevated level of both mental and physical strength. The collector clicked its mandibles, readying again to face its enemies. It seems you are capable of fending for yourself with your sudden regenerative growth, said the collector. It did not look at her, only staring ahead into the darkness, sensing the targets it was to devour. Agreeable. You now in small measure undo the hideous perversion wrought upon your nature and hunt as a predator should. There are 9 hobgoblin variants approaching, all of them spaced out in intervals of 2 to 3 meters. The closest lies 15 meters away. There are several movements of lesser variants interspersing this hobgoblin formation. Normal goblins. You will deal with these, for they are beneath me. You will continue to provide me information. Means to wield this mana. Further direction in utilizing this ability of yours, this Sapia, and further information of this world. As you are now, if you oppose me, you will never defeat me, and even one act of defiance will yield only your swift death. Oh okay, said the demon as she trudged behind the collector. I can fight, I promise. The collector clicked its mandibles before doubling up on its charging power, flowing blood into its already magically enhanced tail and activating its coil boosters. The tail swelled up in size, curling around itself like a spring before all that power, all that pent-up muscular force, exploded forwards, this time with a rush of red energy. The collector shot forwards, and the shockwave burst of movement knocked the demon girl on her back, but the collector paid her no heed. She would recover soon. Instead, it remembered its trigger. Desire. And it desired now more so than ever targets to devour. Their flesh and blood and bones and roots and cores. It would take from them everything. Chapter 49, Sapia. The collector snaked through the tall, grassy and muddy undergrowth as a speeding blur of red and white. Several tree trunks tinted red in its aura zipped past it in its speed, and it snaked around a tree trunk nearest to the first hobgoblin as its sensitive hairs picked up the target's location. Dirt, branches, and leaves rushed up in clouds dragged up by the collector's speed as it swerved around the wide trunk, taking the hobgoblin's blind side. The hobgoblin did not even have a chance to react and look at the collector before a white carapaced fist slammed into its chest and burst through its back in an impact of shattering bone and crushed flesh. The collector raised its fist up, tearing the upper half of the hobgoblin's body in half. The hobgoblin corpse knelt to the ground, the two halves of its torn head falling to its sides. Several normal goblins jumped back in surprise, yelping in fright and falling onto their behinds in the dirt as they gazed up at the towering, armored and horned form of the collector. The collector paid these unworthy foes no heed as it sensed the next hobgoblin to slaughter. Then, the unexpected occurred. Unlike the first hobgoblin, this one continued to fight even with half its body torn in half. Its burly arms tried to reach out to the collector, but the collector was ready. It did not register surprise that slowed it down, after all. Instead, it caught the hobgoblin's arms in its fists and then with a jerking motion back, tore them completely out of their sockets, arcs of blood spraying in the air and splattering on the goblins below as they shrieked and ran. The collector clicked its mandibles in analysis as it noted the aberrant hobgoblin. Much like the first one it had devoured, this one seemed to also be a new variant of some kind. Black in color with red eyes on either half of its split head. Masses of wriggling tendrils on its back. Magical energy emanating from the tendrils. A veil of black aura. Rustling. The next hobgoblin in the formation nearing. The collector calculated its approach. It was to appear in a space between two trees directly in front of the collector. The collector took one of the dismembered hobgoblin arms in its hand and powered its arm with mana, surging it with chaotic red. Then, it hurled the arm straight at the clearing, and the moment the next hobgoblin's head poked in to survey the situation, the thrown arm crashed into its skull like a missile, splattering both limb and head into explosions of flesh and bone. Again, this hobgoblin was anomalous, continuing to move even with its head split apart like a burst. Watermelon. The headless specimen stepped forwards, on a shaky leg at first, then regained its balance, entering into a full-on charge against the collector. It would seem to eliminate these variants of hobgoblin, the collector would have to consume them. Or perhaps there was an alternative. The collector unsheathed the bug brute proboscis in its right arm. The curved, sleek black spike slid forwards from a gap in the collector's white forearm carapace. This spike was fragile, unsuited for combat usage as a blade, but with an easy-to-read target like this. The collector slammed the proboscis straight into the aberrant hobgoblin's chest, injecting the bug brute's toxin in mass quantities flowing throughout the specimen. Even without a head, the magical compound could still affect movement in corpses with severely damaged neural centers, and yet, the collector could still perceive the specimen wrapping its arms around the collector's own, trying to pray free with futile effort. The collector clicked its mandibles before it sensed the female daemon's approach. It did not look back at her, instead using its sensitive hairs to locate her. She seemed to float in the air at an elevation of 1 meter, and as she neared, the various scattered movements of the goblins slowed, then stopped to a halt as their bodies were ground to pulps like flesh put under a hydraulic press. "This Sapia of yours," said the collector. "I wish to utilize it to control this specimen. Yet, it requires me to utilize to your trigger. Wonder, it is. How is it that you perceive this emotion to a strong degree? It's hard to explain in just words. Ah. May I?" The demon floated behind the collector, purple outlining her figure, and the end of her ponytail, the spike called the bell that acted as the focus point for Sapia, extended outwards. "If I connect to your Dell, I can share that emotion with you. Once you know it once, you can remember it. You are tired. Your mana does not seem to flow through you in significant quantities. Your power is still severely stunted. Unable to damage me," said the collector, assessing the risks of allowing her a little measure of access to its psionic network. "Very well. As you do so, inform me of your regenerative capabilities. Is this also an ability inherent to this Sapia?" "No, it's from you. Came from touching the cocoon. I don't know what it is. Healing magic is so hard to come by. And something that can clear away the Helian brand is unheard of." She reached out her Dell, and it gently hovered up to the collector's own. The two spikes of black, wiry mass shook for a moment before the collector felt it. Wonder. Immediately, the collector clicked its mandibles and writhed, sending the demon ducking and shrinking away. This was an emotion it was unable to feel, it knew this instinctively. Its programming should never have allowed it. It knew curiosity, yes. It even knew surprise in limited degree when the goblin champion had exceeded its expectations, surprise that later morphed into admiration. But this emotion, though it had the same base, was far different in intensity. It did not know how to process this emotion. Where to direct it. It stared at the beheaded hobgoblin specimen still impaled in front of it, still trying to wriggle free. Did this lowly vermin, deserve this emotion? This wonder? No, the collector knew this instinctively even if it had never felt this emotion. It did not know how to deal with this emotion, and it did not wish to now when time was a sensitive resource. Like putting a match to a fire and then blowing it out, the collector used the warmth of this emotion to open its demon core and then suppressed it as much as it could, focusing instead on the battle. Before it, on the desire that it was far more familiar with. I'm sorry about that. I didn't know I'm sore began the demon as she tentatively neared the collector. Apologies are a waste of mental resources. You have provided me with the catalyst to open this core of yours. That is sufficient. Answer me this now, this trigger for magic, does it require consistent activation? Said the collector. The demon shook her head. No, not unless your core is forcefully shut down, sealed, or damaged. Agreeable. Then you will have no more need to intrude into my psionic network again, nor shall I allow it, said the collector. Oh okay, I'm sore the demon stopped herself, shaking her head as she remembered the collector's words. With the demon core open, the collector felt the breadth of its powers, this Sapia, flow through its body. Tinges of purple flickered in its aura of red, and its two main lavender eyes began to glow bright. The collector clicked its mandibles. As it had theorized, this power was quite similar to Phoenix. Utilization of the psionic network, the mind as tinkerers tended to generalize it, to affect tangible phenomena upon matter or manipulate the workings of other psionic profiles. As the system had said before, the creation of a personal shield. Manipulation of the personal body to assist in wing-based flight and general enhanced movement. Exerting holding, pushing, and pulling force upon matter. All of these, the collector was familiar with. Even possessed to some degree in its original form, though its psionic energy was largely invested into shielding and resistance to weapons that manipulated the fabrics of space and time. Regardless, the operation of this Sapia would also be like second nature to it. The collector willed the bell attached to its largest dreadlock of fibrous hair to point towards the hobgoblin specimen. It projected an attempt to weaken any mental defenses inherent within the creature, and found that access to its psionic profile was denied. I see now, said the demon as she hovered around the still struggling hobgoblin body, nodding at it. She hovered a hand over the wriggling black tendrils on the corpse's back. Though the tendrils appeared like flesh, they were not solid, comprised of magical energy as they were. There is something controlling this. Sapia is strong, very strong, almost the strongest Dominus-type magic meant to affect the mind but. She touched a hand to her chin. Whoever is controlling this must have conditions on their power. Or they are very powerful. She looked back to the collector. But I wouldn't worry about them taking your mind. You are even stronger. Your mind. It is invincible. I think maybe not even the gods can do anything to it. Very strong is this creature's psionic capability, said the collector. Then I welcome their efforts to attempt an infiltration of my psionic profile. Severed from the greater collective I may be, there is still enough latent defense from the shard within me that any psionic assault this world may muster possesses high probability to fail. The collector said this, but as it felt desire for the battle grow within itself, it thought perhaps it would be a shame for a specimen, a strong one in particular, to waste itself breaking its mind upon processing power that was not entirely the collector's own. The collector clicked its mandibles, driving away those thoughts also. Heretical. The shard was part of itself, one of the fundamental pieces of its psionic profile that gave it purpose. Must focus on the extermination at hand. Must make it efficient. The collector withdrew the proboscis from the hobgoblin, and it faltered back several steps. Notably, blood did not trickle from the sizable puncture wound, for the bugbrute's toxins possessed hemostasis-inducing properties. Before the walking corpse could respond, however, the collector was upon it, tearing it from limb to limb and devouring it. Biomass gained +3. Biomass level, 16/100. Spirit roots gained +5. Root consumption limit, 60/100. The collector would find another specimen to test the bugbrute venom on. For now, it calculated that with the aid of its Sapia to control the venom's flow, the toxin could allow a corpse to move in complex, automated patterns capable of assisting in combat. However, having the corpse retain consciousness would be difficult. Sapia, or the least the type generated from the female daemon's replicated core, was not specialized for controlling so much as taking. It was meant to destroy minds, not control them. It sensed that there were potential demon variants that were potentially more specialized towards control, but these, it would have to encounter and devour later. For now, the collector would collect more battle data and fine-tune its capabilities. Chapter 50, A Challenger. Within 5 minutes, the collector found itself at the end of the hobgoblin formation. The last of the hobgoblins, all of them of the same aberrant variation as the others, breaking apart in digestion within the collector. Biomass gained plus 21. Biomass level, 37 100ths. Spirit roots gained plus 35. Root consumption limit, 95 100ths. A whole host of goblins, all of them white or red-skinned unlike the aberrant hobgoblins, floated in the air, trapped by the female daemon Sapia. Thell hovered in the air beside her as she channeled her magic. To use force push, you just have to will it. Kind of like wanting to push something away, but not with your body, with your mind, your will, said the demon. This much is known to me. The collector clicked its mandibles in understanding, exercising what the female demon was telling it. I see, said the collector as it experimented with one of many goblins suspended in mid-air by the female demon. With a thought, it activated the Sapia spell known as Force Push. The small, white-skinned goblin, frozen as it was on every inch of its body, could not even scream as almost the entirety of its body was blown apart as if struck by a battering arm. The blood and half-destroyed organs visible from its severed body remained beating stuck inside, kept still by the daemon's Sapian force. Amazing, said the demon as she hovered in the air, blinking and nodding. Both her hands flickered with purple energy as they kept the goblins trapped. I must calibrate this ability more, said the collector. I intended only to sever an arm. Bring forth the next experimental unit. The demon nodded and willed another goblin in front of the collector. The collector this time recalibrated its calculations, and when it generated its force push, it was more successful, blowing apart the goblin's arm. Some margin of error. It had also blown apart some of its shoulder and chest. It takes a demon years to grow to your level. And you are getting better by the moment. Days of training I had to do for years and years, so much of it done in just seconds. If you keep growing like this, then you really will keep your promise, you really will kill them all. The collector clicked its mandibles, staring at its right clawed demon hand. It had noticed a flash of purple emit from it before it cast this force push. The demon raised a didactic finger up. Ah, I remember a warning. When you use force push, there is a tell, and it is always from the right hand. Before using it, a tiny bit of light will show up there. The same goes for force pull on your left. The collector clicked its mandibles as it drew out its burly left arm towards the goblin. It willed the goblin towards it. As the demon warned, the collector's left arm did flicker in a small second of purple. The goblin hurtled towards the collector's palm at such a speed that when it hit the solid surface of carapace, it simply blew apart like roadkill. Further calibrations required in utilizing this as well, said the collector. It took a moment to analyze this power, to feel its flow and how it worked. Because it was fundamentally tied to its own mind and body, the collector could grasp the nature of this power, this Sapia, with just the slightest of prompting. I see now, the collector clicked its mandibles. Push and pull. These are the foundational bases of this system of mental processing known as Sapia. Utilizing measures of both, one may be capable of affecting variations of both pushing and pulling power. Such as this minus. The collector felt power crackle across both its demon arms, lighting them in purple as it alternated between pushing and pulling power in smooth, equally yielding and pressuring waves. The ground split apart as a sphere of dirt, mud, and foliage almost 5 meters in diameter dug up from the earth, enveloped in a purple aura as the collector held it in the air with Sapian power. The sphere was not perfect. It undulated and wobbled. Unstable. The collector required more calibrating on this as well. It possessed an exceptional grasp of the flow of mana within and outside its body, for it was merely like an extension of a bodily part. And because mana formed the building block of any type of magic, the collector also possessed a natural grasp of magic. Yet, because it was still an entirely new method of movement, there was unfamiliarity it had to adjust for and smooth out. And I see now the mechanisms by which you dispatched of those inferior goblin specimens. The collector clenched its demon hands into fists, willing the pushing and pulling power into destructive swirls. Power permeated into the sphere, and then a second later, burst out from the inside. It was like a miniature grenade had been detonated, blowing apart the sizable clod of dirt into an omnidirectional shower of earthen remains. And in utilizing expending power externally, there is a trade-off. Not only is there expenditure of mana, but the psionic shielding grows thinner in proportion to the degree of force exerted outside the body, noted the collector. That is all right. You can use force hold and force rend already. 5 years, it takes of focusing of pushing and pulling to know how to hold. Then 3 more years to rend. Even for me, it took 2 years for both, and Thorian said I was special, remarked the demon. All of the low forces, you know already. You may even be able to learn the high forces. Your conceptualization of special does not even begin to scratch even the barest of surfaces that comprise the honed evolutionary edge invested within me, said the collector. The collector's sensitive hairs lining the seams in its white carapace stood on end, vibrating as they sensed waves of motion in the air. Vibrational analysis indicated an object, a projectile, approaching at staggering velocity surpassing the breaking point of sound. Sensitive hairs picked up on movements within a 20-meter radius. Lower in cluttered environments such as this. The object moved too quickly, and the collector sensed it too late for an immediate physical response. Stone shattered against the side of the collector's head, and a sonic crack echoed from afar. The 4 sets of demon horns curling around the sides of the collector's head formed a natural helmet, and the rock broke apart on them with a shattering impact. The collector's head jerked to the side from the impact, but the thick ultrafiber musculature surrounding its neck kept it anchored firm, preventing any concussive damage to the brain nor excessive shock to the spine. It clicked its mandibles as chips of shattered horn fell from its head and landed on the dirt. The horns were not covered in carapace, durable as they already were, but they were shielded by Sapian power. This projectile was powerful, and no doubt ejected by a powerful being. The collector analyzed the small shards of pulverized rock, remnants of the original projectile, and found that they were simply ordinary clumps of mineral. Small green flickers of magical energy faded from the chunks of rock. The power of this projectile came entirely from the specimen that had launched it. "Are you okay?" said the demon as she floated near to the collector. "Do not make unnecessary movements lest you become a target," said the collector as it projected its thoughts. The demon stilled as she heard the collector in her head. This one must be strong to unleash a projectile of this caliber." The collector clicked its mandibles as it located an approximation of the projectile's origin from the sonic crack. Desire pumped throughout its being. "I alone will devour this one. None will take my prey from me." Chapter 51, Thrall Hunt I. Grunt tapped at his pale-skinned, thin wrist, his clawed, wrinkled flinger grazing over a bracelet of thin, darkened bone. The bone, fashioned from one of the Lord's personally evolved hobgoblin, spoke to him, letting him sense where its owner was in this accursed forest of darkness and giant bugs. His staff of bone and wood hovered beside him, emanating a frosty blue light to keep bugs away. At least there were no big spiders in this part of the forest. HRM. Weak signal. And they aren't moving. Strange. Grunt tapped at the bone bracelet several times, trying to smack it back to function, but nothing. It seemed to work fine, meaning the party of evolved hobgoblins the Lord had sent out to investigate the surge of magical energy had simply stopped moving. Relax. Maybe they're just napping. Grunt turned to his companion. Ungus, the goblin champion he had called from the realm of forays. It truly was strange how much the green-skinned goblins had changed since they had started to live in forays. Ungus was tall, a full head taller than Runt, but unlike the champions of Chell where muscle and might reigned supreme, Ungus was lanky. A pot belly jutted from his stomach as he scratched it with long, lanky arms that almost dragged on the forest floor. Shaggy brown fur coated most of Ungus's body, and his deep sunken and green eyes seemingly had little to no energy in them. "It's so cold here," said Ungus with a yawn. "I ought to get some sleep too." "We are at the eve of war," said Runt. "This surge of magical power, I have felt it, and none like it has ever passed through me. That sorcerer, that accursed human, he has made a move against us, I know it. And with a surge like this, more humans, their adventurers, are sure to come. Wonder why the Lord doesn't just run. He seems in over his head if he thinks this whole war thing is going to work," said Ungus. "It will. It must. I have spent the past day working myself to the bone, channeling the dungeon portal so that all of us, we who have been oppressed and scattered across the realms, may unite." Grunt bared a chipped fang at Ungus. And yet all who answer my call are ungrateful goblins like you. I dunno. It's been what, 500 years or something of a big time like that? Since the last time goblins from other realms met. My kind barely remembers yours. Look at how different we are. You know, just seems pointless. Angus shrugged, his thin shoulders and large arms making exaggerated up and down motions. We might as well all be completely different at this point. I have no idea how your kind live, and you and your frosty ice boys have no idea how we live. The old man's gone nuts, that's for sure. Thinks it's still like 1,000 years ago or something when there were lots of us all together. Well, can't blame him. I guess he did wake up from that era. Must be real jarring to see how much has changed. You would dare to question the Lord's grand purpose. Grunt shook his head, his vision blurring as his anger flared up. He was too tired from channeling the dungeon portal without sleep or food or rest just as the Lord had commanded. He sighed. You do not know. But as a thrall, I have listened to stories of how the Goblin Kingdom, a kingdom, not a bunch of scattered tribes struggling to live, spread across all the realms with a king that commanded even the respect of the gods. Angus shrugged again. Then the gods got tired or something and blasted our old king into little bits. Figure the same will happen here. Why did you even answer my call if you are to be like this? Said Runt. Dunno. Fairies and elves control all the warp temples, and the world will end before they ever let us get near them. So I never get the chance to leave the realm, said Angus. Thought it would be fun, though. Hey, at least I brought a couple of my friends. You needed numbers, right? Your boys from the north wouldn't even answer your call, but I did. That must mean something, right? Grunt entered into a state of disgruntled quiet. Angus was strong, that much was evident from the amount of mana surging from him. As strong as Juzo. But Angus brought with him only 5 hobgoblins. Grunt had tried calling the entire rest of the Frostskull tribe, a tribe numbering 100 strong, but only those loyal to him, a pithy 20, had further come. The remainder did not wish to lose more and stayed with the other half of the tribe led under their own champion. Then, Grunt tried calling for more goblins from Sheen. None would come, believing the loss of a champion too great a risk for them. Even the remainder of Juzo's tribe wished to leave, their desire quelled only by the Lord's domineering presence. The Lord himself had raised 20 evolved, likely the maximum of his ability, and that meant in total, there were almost 60 hobgoblins and 200 goblins in their camp. A force easily powerful enough to take the human village to the south, but then what? Adventurers would arrive. No, strong ones were probably already on the way, lured in by the surge of magic. What would they do then? Grunt shook his head. No retreat, that was the Lord had said. Fight or die trying to resurrect the old ways. All these new goblins, these green-skinned ones and red-skinned ones, all of them had forgotten the old ways. But not Runt. He would stay true to the fight and the Lord to the end, because as a thrall, he understood the importance of tradition. Tradition was the only thing that remained when there was nothing but bones left of a generation. The only thing that mattered enough to get passed down. Even now, Runt worried. At the Lord's command, he had trekked westwards for 2 hours with Angus by now, following slightly behind the evolved hobgoblin party sent by the Lord himself. But even leaving the main camp, the dungeon, so defenseless worried Runt. Other than the Lord, he alone possessed the means to connect with the dungeon and move its defenses and resources. If adventurers attacked now. No, Runt had to focus on his current mission, for that was the Lord's will, and the Lord was mighty enough to handle himself. I am close enough for my farsight, said Runt. He grabbed his bone staff and punched it into the yielding soil. The human skull capping the staff glowed, the sockets infusing with pale blue light. Swirls of flaky ice began to form above the skull, building up into a clear ball. That's pretty interesting, said Angus as he narrowed his squinty green eyes, staring at images beginning to flash from the ball of ice. And your tribe would know the ancient art of bone binding should you have kept up with the old ways, said Runt. He shook his head, his skull helmet shaking from side to side. I am not the mightiest among the thralls, but look even what I may do. We are at nearly 300 meters away, but with this skull, the skull of a mighty human shaman, I may usurp the very spells he once wielded against us. Look minus, said Runt as he proudly pointed at the images formed in the ice ball. His expression twisted in surprise and his boasting ended abruptly. What is that? A monster of a kind Runt had never seen before stood atop the corpse of the Lord's evolved hobgoblin. This monster. It was dangerous. Dangerous beyond measure, he could tell, even through the simple image. Angus, too, sensed this, and whistled. Wow, look at that. You get a lot of these kinda monsters here. Looks kinda like a demon. Thought they were basically extinct or something. No. I know not what this is, but it must be dealt with, said Runt. We must go back and inform the Lord. Obtain reinforcements. It may be a monstrosity crafted by the sorcerer to the west. This time, I can tell that it is sensitive to magic. Better. Relax, relax, said Angus as he cracked his neck and looked around. He picked up a decently sized rock, palming it in his wide hand. Yes, this ought to do. You know, one of the reasons I came here was cause I was kinda curious. I've blown off a lot of fairy and elf heads with my throws. Pretty proud of my throwing arm myself. Always wanted to know, how do Terran creatures stack up? Angus cupped the rock in both of his furred hands and then drew it far back, his long, lanky arms stretching almost impossibly far behind him as he drove a foot forwards into the dirt. No, do not alert it until we have more forces, said Runt, but it was too late. Green light surged into the rock, and then Angus threw it. A sonic crack boomed from the throw, driving back a cloud of dirt and loose foliage. Runt squinted his eyes as the stone sailed far into the forest, pinging off several tree trunks until Runt looked at the ice ball. The stone smashed against the monster, but it remained largely unharmed, only taking a mere chip of damage to its horn. Then, the monster moved. Fast. Towards their general location. Wow, said Angus with another whistle. He picked up another rock, infusing it once more with magical energy that shone green. I ought to wind up for this one. He rotated his throwing arm, and each time it rotated, a surge of green energy crackled around him, intensifying with each rotation. After 5 rotations, he stopped, cupping the rock in his hands. His eyes were glued to the ice ball, looking at the speeding form of the monster as it slithered through the forest at impossibly fast speeds, snaking past tree trunks, angling its body so it used them as cover. This thing's real fast. Trying to dodge me, too. But I'm too good for that. In forays, the forests are so overgrown that we get a kind of sixth sense in 'em. Lets us see through the trunks and kinda feel for things. And with the right bit of spin minus, Angus directed the flow of magical energy surging in the rock, the aura of green started to whirl around the stone. Then, Angus threw the rock once more, and this time, the force of the throw was massive enough to blow apart the dirt around his feet in a tiny explosion. Runt shielded his eyes from debris as he kept watching the ice ball. Once more, the glowing green rock shattered against the monster, this time on its arm. An explosion of shattered rock and released magical energy crackled from the point of impact, cracking the monster's white shell. And bullseye. But wow, that thing has really, really hard skin, said Angus. With 5 wind-ups, I would blow through its arm completely. Look, you fool, it is coming to us again, said Runt as he pointed at the creature's speeding form. It had only paused for a mere second after being hit. It is nearly upon us. Oh, relax. Here, this ought to do it. I'll go for its head again. Angus picked up another rock, cupped it, then wounded up 10 times, charging up a bit less than double the power he had inputted in the last throw. Goodbye, monster. You were pretty fun to play around with. Angus threw the stone, and this time, the blowback of the throw was enough to knock him straight off his feet. He landed on his butt and rubbed his arm. Phew, haven't had to throw that hard in a long, long time. So. Angus stared up at the ice ball and even his squinty eyes widened. The monster had stopped the speeding rock in midair, right before it could impact his head. An aura of purple energy outlined the creature, and that aura extended to the rock, holding it in place. The monster clicked its mandibles as it analyzed the rock. Green magical energy from Angus still lay infused in the rock, spinning in complex angles that let them bounce off from tree trunks and swerve to hit the beast. The rock floated into the monster's own hands, and it cupped it. A flash of purple energy burst from its hands, infusing into the stone. It's gonna throw it, whispered Angus. Take cover, shouted Runt. I cannot cast more than 1 spell at a time. We must move. No, relax, said Angus as he stood up. Though his voice seemed ever calm, his steps drew him towards the ice ball, his eyes utterly glued to the image projected on it. There's no way, right? That thing's still what, 100 meters away. Plenty of trees left in his way. He doesn't have my senses. He doesn't know how to use my spin. He hasn't practiced like me. Come on, there's no way he's going to hit us. Chapter 52. Brawl Hunt 2. Grunt watched the ice ball at the monstrous creature reflected on the surface. The monster infused its own purple magical energy into the rock and then craned its muscular arms behind its back, twisting its serpentine body in a way very similar to Angus's own throwing form. There was no doubt about this. This creature was going to hit them. Or get close to hitting them. Grunt disabled Farsight, and the ball of ice hovering above his skull staff shattered. "What are you doing?" said Angus. "There's no way minus." Angus's arm broke apart from the elbow. It was like an all-erasing, invisible pillar of force had run straight through his arm, completely disintegrating everything much of what connected his forearm to his upper arm. It was only when the sonic boom erupted and cracked towards them that blood finally spurted from Angus's mangled limb. The goblin champion howled in pain as he leapt up and down, his one remaining hand grabbing tight at the bleeding, armless stump under his shoulder. Grunt took action. "You see now the wisdom of my thoughts. Do something," said Angus as he pointed forwards, into the darkness of the forest clearing where this monster must have been rapidly approaching. 100 meters was nothing to this beast that traveled the forests with a speed that surpassed any of the insects that called it their home. Grunt grunted and took one of the necklaces around his neck, this one lined with the teeth of the ice-antlered shard stag, and channeled the frigid magic that lay inherent within them. He tore the necklace off and tossed it in front of him, and in mid-air, it glowed a bright blue before exploding, manifesting with a sudden gust of chilling air into a wall of sturdy ice. "This will protect us." Now Grunt turned around to talk to Angus only to find that the champion had run away, using his superior agility to rush into the other end of the clearing. "Green-skinned coward," spat Grunt, but he knew he had no time to be cursing his luck and choice of companions. His lengthy, wrinkled ears pricked up, the wispy gray hairs on them standing on end as he heard rustling. The rustling of a massive presence circling around the thickly forested edge of the clearing. Grunt's bulbous blue eyes struggled to keep up with his hearing as he heard the creature rustle in one direction, then in the complete opposite end of the clearing, and then again somewhere else. Grunt hugged the wall of ice he created. Angus's spin was extremely impressive. An application of his Inhura that allowed his kind to charge up strong blows by rotating their arms and general body tempering magic, but it was a costly technique. Grunt's eyes were extremely sensitive to magic. That was one of the reasons the tribe had chosen him from birth to be a thrall. Though his body was smaller, weaker, his mind was sharp, and his eyes even sharper. Any flare-up of magic, Grunt would sense, and he would hide behind the durable wall of ice at the right angle before any rock hit him. But that did not happen. Instead, something blurred into Grunt's vision, and he found a strand of silk tied to his skull staff. The end of the strand lay in the darkness of the clearing, and before he could react, the string tightened and reeled in, and within seconds, the staff was gone, absorbed into the darkness. Grunt had sensed no magic at all from that maneuver. He growled at the dark. Then that meant that this monster had both magical might and physical power. A rare combination for familiars. Something like this would have taken the entire Frostskull tribe to tear down. Like the time they had prevailed against the giant Jotner monstrosity. But Grunt was alone here. He could not scavenge the bones of the fallen to fuel his magic. All he had were the rapidly diminishing accessories of bone on his body now. And alone, he instinctively knew his death was imminent. If there was even the slightest chance of talking his way out of his death, of groveling in the dirt or bargaining, he would have taken it, but he had a feeling. A feeling that crawled from his neck down to his spine, sending shivers throughout his body in a way that the cold of the north never could. The cold of a death that was to come to him through the jaws of a predator, something that was pointless to talk to. Knowing this strangely took out much of his fear, and he felt oddly calm. He put a hand on one of his arms, growling and baring his cracked, stubby teeth. The collector circled the thrall, granting it some auditory signals here and there to allow it to perform some actions. In this way, the collector would gain battle data about the thrall and his magic while also ascertaining whether there was anything truly useful to consume from the specimen. After all, as of now, the collector merely had 3 cores it could slot into its body, though in time, it would be able to develop more capacity. It had already devoured the stick of wood topped with a human cranium and found that there was not much useful for it. Metalloglottic ossifier sample obtained. Minus runewood. The wood had a property of channeling magical energy through it more efficiently, but not to a staggeringly improved degree, and the skull's biomass was that of an ordinary human. There had been no roots or core to retrieve from the human, for it seemed that those were even more sensitive to exploration than even memory retrieval from the brain. This left the skull with only its base biomass, which provided not even a tenth of a single point at the collector's current level. Yet, the thrall did not seem to be doing anything of note worth either. Rather, the specimen seemed to be waiting for the collector to make the first move. The collector desired to force him to utilize his mist form spell. Now that the collector possessed the means to sense mana and its flow, it would be able to determine the primary functioning of the spell that had once confounded it so. Thus, the collector emerged from its hiding spot, surging forwards with a closed fist to smash against the thrall. The thrall barely had a moment of time to look up at the collector's towering form before a carapaced, red-wreathed fist smashed down into his head. The collector clicked its mandibles in understanding as its fist, wide enough to be size of the thrall's entire head, whooshed past the thrall's form. The thrall dissipated into foggy mist, and several meters away, the thrall reformed with his arm stuck out towards the collector. Notably, the thrall had a deep scratch running from his forehead down to his stomach in an approximation of where the collector would have torn through him. Light emanated from the thrall's arm, specifically from the bones underneath the skin. The collector perceived that all the bones comprising its hands up to its humerus glowed bright with blue, shining through the specimen's flesh. A moment later, and the arm burst apart in the same hue of light, and a wave of rippling and rumbling white and blue magical energy crashed towards the collector in an avalanche that managed to even dwarf it. The collector projected its sapien barrier outwards from itself, preventing the massive wave of mana from directly touching its skin. The hostile mana slammed against its purple sapien barrier, forming into an ice formation that towered over even the darkwood trees at the edge of the clearings. Mana level, 60% 40%. Interesting. The collector clicked its mandibles as it analyzed what had occurred. The thrall's mist form essentially used its own bones as a conduit to channel mana throughout its body and disperse it, temporarily reducing the body into an elementally compatible structure of mist. That made it impervious to ordinary physical damage and highly resistant to even the magic-boosted punches from the collector. The collector then inspected the ice around it. It was completely encased in a towering structure of ice, though extending its sapien barrier had prevented the ice from constricting its movements, leaving the collector standing in a neat sphere within the frozen wave. It drew the barrier back, for extending it past the body was heavily taxing to mana, as were other forms of sapien magic. By using his own bones as a conduit once more and even sacrificing them, the thrall had been able to essentially surpass his limits and effect a spell that exceeded the collector's own expectations. This must have been akin to how the other specimens such as the red-skinned champion had broken their own limits even when accounting for mana enhancing their strength. The collector closed its fists, pumping blood and mana into them. Their already impressive muscular density only swelled even more in size, foggy ripples of red floating above like crimson steam. It collected the breath of ice in front of it and determined this would buy the thrall merely 5 seconds of time. The collector punched the wall of ice in front of itself, its two arms punching forwards with carapace-plated fists that shattered and smashed the ice in great chunks with every blow, and there were many, many blows. So many blows at such a speed that they blurred into an endless, rapid staccato of crashing blows, and the entire ice structure groaned and shook as cracks began to line its sizable length. The collector drilled through the ice, and when it neared the other end, unleashed one last, powerful hit to completely shatter an opening for itself. It moved out into the open air and found that the thrall had left the clearing in the small time he had purchased for himself with his arm. Yet, its scent was still strong. It had not traveled far. Before the shaking and groaning ice dome collapsed upon itself, the collector was already gone, slithering into the direction where the thrall's scent was strongest. Within seconds, the collector was back upon the thrall. The thrall growled and aimed his one remaining arm at the collector. Blood spurted from his gaping, empty left shoulder socket, weakening his every step. The collector tested one last confirmation of its analyses. It swiped at the thrall's head with its monomolecular claws, and the thrall broke apart again into mist that started to billow backwards, away from the collector. It was here that the collector aimed both hands at the thrall, and before he could reform, utilized force hold to keep the mist in place. A purple outline covered the cloud of mist containing the thrall's essence, freezing it in this gaseous state of matter. The collector clicked its mandibles. Holding the thrall in this state was extremely easy. Another hypothesis proven correct. The collector had analyzed from its prior experimentations and gathering of battle data that when it attempted to directly force its magical energy on a foreign object, the cost was higher than when it flowed mana within its own body parts, scaling up with the dimensions and mass of the object. In addition, the collector noted with more interest, living beings were significantly more difficult to manipulate, with even small goblins requiring more mana expenditure to force hold than large swathes of unresisting dirt. This, the collector sensed, was because of the spirit roots and cores. Even in living beings where they were unawakened, they still formed a natural defense mechanism that made infiltration via foreign magical signatures extremely difficult. Force hold and other magic like it that relied on directly manipulating other living beings therefore was highly inefficient to utilize. However, in cases like this where the target willingly dispersed the mana flowing through their body, the collector willed the mist above its head and condensed it into a sphere of foggy white. Then direct manipulation of the foreign body, even one possessing of an awakened core and magic sensitivity, was a minimal effort. The collector reduced the size of the sphere above its head, and as it grew smaller and smaller, it opened up its carapace plates covering its face like a helmet sliding aside to reveal its waiting and hungry jaws. The sphere condensed, and when the mist was focused down into the size of a tennis ball, the thrall could no longer hold his mist form, and the mist turned crimson first, then exploded into a burst of blood and ground up flesh and organs that rained down into the collector's mouth. Chapter 53, Dungeon Eye. Biomass gained +8. Biomass level, 45 100ths. Spirit roots gained +50. Root consumption limit, 100 100ths. Genetic material gained. Stored genetic material. Black ant. Deer. Black hobgoblin. Human. Lesser oni. Frostborn. Hobgoblin. Horse. Lesser great centipede. Lesser great beetle. Spitting great beetle. Leafblade insect. Frostborn hobgoblin thrall core new. Mana level, 40% 100%. The collector sheathed its jaws and clicked its mandibles. It had wasted a vast majority of the spirit roots the thrall granted, but no great matter. It desired more so the thrall's core, and it seemed that for the foreseeable future, it would gain spirit roots at a far quicker rate than it did biomass. It would seem then that for biomass charged with mana, it was not the quantity of roots that mattered, but their inherent quality that allowed them to store more mana within them. Thus, it would be more efficient for the collector to emphasize targets with rich amounts of mana within them. In other words, strong targets. Agreeable to the collector. Now that the collector possessed the thrall's core, it could approximate a general sense of what it could do, but its capacity to inherently understand the magical abilities associated with it was not nearly as refined as its ability to know all the biological capabilities of a genetic sample. The collector knew now that the thrall could draw upon magical energy latent within bones, even those within himself, but finer details such as potential limitations and risks escaped it. These, it would have to investigate on its own through further experimentation or reference through the female daemon's extensive knowledge stores. The collector could incorporate the core directly into its empty slot without the need for an evolutionary cocoon, but once slotted, removal or modification would require a cocoon. Thus, it had to be careful about whether it would decide to incorporate this thrall's core. Yet, there was still another target and its core to consider. The scent of another blood trail. Further along in the dark woods. The scent of the supposedly strong one, though, as the collector came to realize with measured disappointment, far weaker than it had initially thought it to be. No matter. The collector would still grant it death and entry into the collective for even managing to damage the collector's form. Though disappointing that the specimen had decided to run instead of choosing to stand and fight. You're here. The collector registered the presence of the female demon as she floated and approached its back. Aberrant patterns in her breathing indicated signs of physical stress likely brought upon by excessive usage of magic. Yet, still well within her limits. The collector could sense significant disruptions of mana flow within the specimen, but accounting for deficiencies, a rough calculation of her potential strength at her peak was formidable, well above any sorcerer or magic-sensitive individual the collector had encountered so far. Had the specimen been properly nurtured from the start of her growth cycle, her development might have been such that she could have dwarfed the collector's current magical abilities several times over. Yet, the years of damage wrought upon her had likely permanently stunted her to a large degree. What was all of that, she said. That rock that hit you, and the huge ice wall, and minus. It matters not, said the collector. There is still yet another target that eludes my jaws. I will engage in devouring it. Wait, let me tether to you, said the female demon. I didn't know if it would work before because you're not truly a demon, but now I'm sure. Explain further. Well, it's something demons can do with each other, is what I've read, though I've never been able to talk to another one. In the tower, they kept us all separated and all I could hear were screams and minus. The collector clicked its mandibles, and this time, the demon understood the clicking and focused her thoughts before the collector prompted her vocally. Tethering is when I link my force field to yours, so when you move, I follow right behind. When you use push or pull, I can help if you ever need it. It doesn't connect our feelings any. The collector clicked its mandibles in understanding, further recognizing a way in which Sapia could be utilized. Agreeable, said the collector. Perform this tethering quickly. The female demon nodded and floated right behind the collector. Her ponytail reached out, and the veil vibrated as it touched the purple force field outlining the collector's bulky form. The daemon's force field thickened in color as hers merged with the collector's. The collector perceived this process, noted its mechanisms, and then wasted not a single more moment before it slithered into the inky, light-voided black of the Darkwoods with another rush of magically boosted speed, for consuming the excess of the thrall's vast stores of roots and awakened core had almost fully replenished its mana levels. Whoa! Shouted the demon as she flew right behind the collector at a speed that made her eyes widen. The collector followed the scent of blood and the unique olfactory signature of the next target and found that from its meandering, erratic pathing that it did not head into the direction of the main goblin encampment. Likely, blood loss and a lack of light prevented this specimen from ascertaining its direction. Yet, the specimen still moved quickly. At a speed that almost rivaled the collector's own, it seemed. Judging from occasional tracks in the dirt and scratch marks etched into the darkwood tree trunks, the creature was well adapted to moving within forest environments, swinging from branches to provide itself formidable acceleration. But this was not a game of attrition the specimen could win. The collector possessed supremely efficient bodily mechanisms down to every single fiber of its musculature that made it nigh endlessly active, whereas the inefficient and weak flesh of this specimen would soon yield to its injuries. Within 10 minutes, the collector came near the specimen. Near enough that it could hear the specimen rustling through the woods, swinging from branch to branch even in this complete darkness, though occasionally, it would hit an obstacle and force itself to the ground, hence the occasional tracks in the dirt. Merely hearing the creature was enough to begin its execution. The collector stopped its rush through the dark woods and shoveled up and compacted a large ball of dirt in cupped palms. It infused the ball with magical energy, lines of purple streaking across the dirt. The magical energy permeated throughout the ball's structure, supporting and solidifying its composition to the point it became solid like titanium alloy. Reinforcement, noted the demon as she saw the collector. She had a hand to her head, likely to halt side effects of nausea from traveling at velocities she was unused to. Combination of a projection of mana and exhale of its flow on top of an advanced grasp of mana flow itself. You truly had no idea of magic and mana beforehand. These foreign principles escaped my grasp once, for they are unique to this specific planet, but in experiencing them, I understand that they hold much that is analogous to natural physical processes, and as such, elementary in concept to grasp and wield, said the collector. It began to replicate the specific flow of mana within the ball, generating a spinning aura of purple Sapian energy, for the destructive chaos energy from its prime core was unsuited to more delicate processes like this. Strands of purple danced around the dark sphere, circling round and round it until the individual lines merged into a fluxing, ever-moving wave of light spinning around the ball. The collector focused its auditory systems on the rapidly fading sounds of the fleeing specimen rustling through the woods, and then adjusted the flow of mana spinning around the ball accordingly to new coordinates. It accounted for the night breeze and obstacles such as trees. With its sensitive hairs, it could curve the ball around the trees in a 20-meter radius in front of it, but beyond that, it would simply need enough power to smash through the trunks to reach the target. Another, more intense glow of purple burst around the ball before condensing and darkening back within it. Mana level, 80%, 50%. That's a lot of mana in there, said the female demon. This application of mana is intensive. Largely inefficient, yet potentially useful in certain scenarios. Simply channeling mana through neuromuscular enhancement in the process you describe as exhale is far more efficient in most combat simulations. The collector drew back the ball of mana-infused dirt, twisting its body back to maximize rotational force. Yet, this will allow me to gather necessary combat data to make this projectile-based application of mana more usable. A burst of wind flowed from the collector as it threw the ball, the purple wreathed sphere shooting outwards as a tail of clumped-up sound waves trailed behind it before exploding out in a boom. The ball audibly smashed through several trunks in the distance, loosing groaning cracks from the shattered wood before finally punctuating its end with a howling scream from the fleeing specimen. The collector felt the mana discharge from its body, the constant heat emanating from both its prime and demon cores simmering down to a noticeable degree. Though a newfound form of strength, this was also a reminder of weakness. A supersonic projectile of this size and mass was nothing compared to tinkering firearms. Even the widespread anti-collective AC-18 model of the bolter rifle could fire magnetic rail-charged 8mm depleted uranium rounds at hypersonic speeds, and the AC-20 models could also engage in fully automated spreads to deal with the collective's infinite swarms. But at the rate of the collector's current growth, it would far exceed any tinkerer's tools in short order, burning this planet down and returning to the collective with the prized evolutionary development of magic. Chapter 54, Dungeon 2. The collector stepped over the fleeing specimen's corpse. It was a goblin of a different variant than the ones it had witnessed, covered with brown fur and possessing of ape-like features such as longer arms and high muscle density for moving through the trees of forested environments. Though, it appeared from the density of the fur that it was meant more to dissipate heat and regulate internal temperatures than to provide warmth, indicating this specimen originated from a warmer, likely tropical climate. Like the other hobgoblin variants, this creature did not belong here. A strong indicator that these goblins too possessed a means with which to warp, for they did not show any indications of wielding sufficiently advanced vehicular technology. The collector clicked its mandibles. It had desired to simply cripple the specimen by blowing off its legs, but the collector had misjudged its distance and timing by a 5% margin of error, and that showed in a gaping hole on the specimen's lower abdomen. Another hobgoblin. This one. The fur. Let me see. The female demon floated over the corpse, cocking her head in academic scrutiny. It is from the realm of forays. And from its size. A champion, too. There must be a lord here. You are uncovering information for yourself that is already known to me, said the collector. Tell me instead the possibility of this variant, this lord, possessing the means to access warp-based travel. The female demon specimen hovered in the air, putting a hand to her chin, and then shook her head. Goblins cannot travel the realms with their own power. Nothing can except the Danavans, but nobody has ever seen them. But if there is a dungeon here, and the Lord is the dungeon boss, then maybe. Dungeons. Explain further, said the collector. Dungeons. Dungeons, the demon said to herself, searching her memories. Then, she adopted another tone, reciting information. Dungeons are still a mystery. How they came be is difficult to tell, and there are 1,000 different tomes all with a different explanation. But what I, Hazy, former adventurer 7-star adventurer, can tell you is what they are and how to deal with them. If you are reading this, you are probably a 1 or 2-star adventurer. So, you know the basics. Dungeons are temporary layers that often divide itself into layers, and the more layers there are, the higher ranked the dungeon is. At the bottom of the dungeon, there's a monster called the boss that anchors the whole layer into existence. There are 2 types of dungeons. Bound and unbound. Bound means that the dungeon stays static and won't change and expand. Unbound means the dungeon can shift, even move, and grow. Bound dungeons tend to be harder to clear with more layers, while unbound dungeons are dangerous because they can copy themselves over time. But at the end of it all, you take the boss out and the dungeon collapses. Keep the collateral low, even more so with unbound dungeons, and you're all set. That's what most adventurers learn in their first year of working with the League. Of course, this is all just general talk. Once you put in the field work for as many years as I have, you start to realize that although there are plenty of rules in this world, there's plenty of wriggle room between them as well. There are horribly dangerous dungeons that merely have 1 layer. There are dungeons that anchor to a boss that is not even a monster, maybe a crystal or living wall or, in one particularly bad case, a spore rooting inside an invading adventurer, making it so you cannot clear it without killing someone in your own party. You have no idea what you will face in dungeons as an adventurer. What you do need to know is humility. You need to know when you have to retreat, preferably with a priestess of the paths, and you need to know when a dungeon is dangerous enough to call for help. The League has limited resources, you knowing how to use them and when to call for them will save your life, especially if you are lower ranking than any artisanal sword or shield crafted from tallow or utu or any place of renowned forging. Because at the end of the day, unless you're 3 stars or above, you are worthless. You will have no coin, no resources, and no reputation. And, most likely, you will be weak. A harsh truth, but one better known than ignored until death. And there is no shame in splitting a dungeon's rewards with whatever higher-ranked party or league official comes to aid you. If anything, it will make your life easier and continue it at the same time. But you must present the league with a good case for their assistance. For that, you need information. Any dungeon you see, don't enter it, stay at its perimeter and do a routine scouting. Get a sorcerer from the order to read the ley lines in the area. Check for disturbances. If you do not have a sorcerer in your party, then hire one. Don't skimp out on a good sorcerer because of coin. Better to have your life than an empty bag. Check first and foremost if there's mana signatures in the ley lines that come from different realms. This means the dungeon is not only unbound, but also capable of drawing monsters from different realms. If this is the case, report back to the nearest league sentry. Elevate the threat ranking of the dungeon 1 full rank. Dungeons like this are unstable and capable of growing in the blink of an eye. Try to find what exactly is causing the instability. Most of the time, the dungeon boss will be the culprit, but sometimes, there are other entities, maybe a subordinate monster or a structure that is tapping into the instability. If you do not have the power to fully clear the dungeon and slay the boss, then focus on disabling these entities, warpers as they're known in our trade, because that alone will take out half the dungeon's threat. Then, you check for minus. The demon stopped, nodding to herself. That is all I read before Thorian took the book from me. He told me I had no place reading about adventurers and getting odd ideas in my head. The collector clicked its mandibles. That is sufficient information. Tell me, do you understand the means by which to identify these layers known as dungeons and their mechanism? The entities within them designated as a boss. I can tell when there's a dungeon, I think, but everything else, no, the dungeons, well, if you read the ley lines, they appear like, something will be wrong with them. I can show you if we get near one. The demon perked up, her eyes alight with the emotion of wonder that so vexed the collector. Why? Are we going to go into one? She asked, her words breaking apart not because of nervousness this time, but because of curiosity. I sense eagerness in approaching this lair classified a dungeon. Does this area not pose a significant threat? Noted the collector. The female demon shook her head several times. They do, I think, well, I read that they are very dangerous, but the feeling of clearing a dungeon and seeing it, I have always wanted it. Once, I think, I wanted to be an adventurer. This wonder that you feel, I sense it within you in thought of this dungeon. Yet, I sense that this emotion is most appropriate when witnessing the all-encompassing presence of the collective. Soon, within the collective, you will learn to detach this wonder from the phenomena of this world that amounts to little more than slightly special drivel, said the collector. And I now head to this dungeon. You are to inform me when you sense the necessary environmental anomalies that indicate its presence. The collector clicked its mandibles, approximating where the main goblin encampment was and heading to that direction. It theorized that this encampment was a dungeon through contextual clues. First, there was the appearance of many goblin variants all adapted to different biomes. Then there was the fact that the goblins were amassing their numbers for some kind of war effort, and that would require both an expansion of territory and additional troops all entailed within the unbound dungeon with a warper that the female demon spoke of. Perhaps more evidently, the collector could feel the thrall's core and sensed that there were remnants of psionic energy within it. The stench of dealing with warp-based travel, though of a different kind than that which the collector was familiar with spacefaring tinkerers. Thus, the collector reasoned that the thrall had been a warper for a dungeon with the goblin lord as its boss. Good. The collector clicked its mandibles, potentially seeing the end of its mission in near sight. If this dungeon possessed a channel for warping adequately powerful enough, the collector could utilize it to send out its psionic charge to the collective, regaining connection with the hive mind and signaling its coordinates for a full-scale takeover. It would not have to force its way through heavily guarded population centers that housed warp temples. If the collector did not move now, there was a chance that these humans, These adventurers would get to the dungeon first and slay its boss, causing, as the female specimen recited, the destruction of the warp gate. The collector could not allow that. It took the corpse of the fleeing specimen under its tail and devoured it. Biomass gained plus 12. Biomass level, 67 100ths. Spirit roots gained plus 30. Root consumption limit, 100 100ths. Genetic material gained. Stored genetic material. Black ant. Deer. Black hobgoblin. Human. Lesser oni. Frostborn hobgoblin. Horse. Lesser great centipede. Lesser great beetle. Spitting great beetle. Leafblade insect. Frostborn hobgoblin thrall core. Bineswinger goblin champion core. Mana level, 50% 100%. It fully embraced the desire brimming in its heart, rushing into the forest before the demon specimen could respond to it, rag-dolling her behind it while she tried to adjust to the sudden burst of speed. One final battle. One final, good battle. This, the collector desired before the dawn of the collective. Though the collector knew this was heretical, it wished to savor this feeling a last time, this desire of the battle to the strong before the hive mind could reset the collector and eliminate the anomalies growing within it. Chapter 55, Great Purpose. The collector slithered its way through the dark woods. Wide tree trunks came into its vision, then blurred behind it as it rushed through the forest. At first, the female demon specimen tethered behind it had exhibited an elevated heart rate and tensed muscles indicative of fear, likely at the speed with which the collector moved, but soon, she had adjusted herself. With some skill, the collector noted. The demon had oriented herself using minor applications of Sapian force to keep herself more stably tethered to the collector, and this required not only a good approximation of the collector's speed, but also when it would make twists and turns. With the collector's calculations, it would take 40 minutes to reach the main goblin encampment if the memories of its approximate coordinates were correct. Margin of error within 8 minutes. Its approximate speed, 400 kilometers per hour. And with every passing day, its speed and strength would increase to no end, unbound as it was now by mana enriching its physical properties. Yet, the collector would not reach those heights of power, that zenith of strength that lay beyond its limitations, even perhaps by the metamorphosis level limits set upon it by the collective, once it signaled to the collective. No, such thinking was flawed. The collective was strength incarnate already. Assimilating within it once more was the zenith of purpose and power the collector strived for, respected and desired. For in the end, that was the collector's designated life cycle. To be born with strength, to fight enemies, to gain their biomass and samples, and then in turn, when it became defective or outdated, to become consumed by the collective itself, enriching the greater whole with new samples for the great purpose. And the collector knew that its life cycle would draw to an end once the collective dawned. The collector was defective, and the collective would either consume it for its unique new samples or restart the shard within it. Either way, the collector as it was now would no longer come to be in time. And all for the better. The collector would serve its glorious purpose. Become whole once more. After some time traveling unimpeded, the collector sensed the demon speaking to it. I never asked. Where are you from? Asked the demon. I do not herald from any one place. No fixed geographical point bound by the arbitrary limitations of borders and other such divisions. I am born of the collective, said the collector. You've mentioned it, the collective. And, forgive me for asking, but I am curious, what is it? You turn your curiosity, this wonder, to the collective. Agreeable, said the collector, projecting its thoughts for ease of communication at its current speed of travel. The collective is no mere thing. It is being itself. Evolution progressed and honed into a singularity that will never falter. It is the absorbed will of countless species that have all lost the discord and differences that once demarcated them as individuals. Inducted into the collective, they become one, and as one, they attain a utopic perfection that no tinkering civilization can ever hope to match or even conceptualize. I can feel what you are saying a little bit, even if your words are hard for me, and I can sense that this collective is something big, said the demon. Something you really, really believe in. The collective. You said there are so many people in there, but none of them hate each other. Emotions such as hate are outdated and vestigial remnants of tinkering imperfection, said the collector. Even within myself that is afforded limited emotion, I may hold measured judgments against you tinkerers, but hate? I do not hate your kind. I simply see all of you as life that has strayed afar from the path of evolution, marking yourselves with discord even among your own kind, in need of absolution from yourselves. For it is known that you tinkerers are inherently self-destructive. Even without an external threat, you tend towards warring amongst yourselves regardless of the form you take in the biomes you originally adapted to. Without the advent of warp-based technology, there is no doubt that you tinkerers would have hit a wall in development and expansion caused by conflict among yourselves and other self-destructive tendencies. Thus, tinkering is a disease, a plague that feasts upon itself and others while leaving nothing of value to the universe. It is inherently self-destructive, a heresy against the fundamental principle of evolution, the propagation of one's own. Within the short time frames of your tinkering lives, you may believe your methods best to propagate, but in greater scales of time, it is faulty to the highest degree. Oh, said the demon with wonder. She gazed at the collector's slithering form, at the back of its horned head. That was one thing I noticed from you. No hate. Just calm. And you say that the collective, everyone in it, feels this calm. That is precisely so, said the collector. The demon hung her head down. I never wanted to hate. It was hard for me too. Even when I hurt so much, it was hard. Dorian never told me to hate. Mother never told me to hate. But I don't know. When the hurt kept going on and it felt like it would never end, I just had nothing left. Nothing left but hate. It makes me feel bad inside, a little. I know it's wrong, imperfect, like you say, but I still want to see this world break down just as much as I did. That's why I trusted you so much from the start, because you were going to hurt people. She paused, taking a long look at the collector. But if you are going to change everything, bring calm to everyone, make everyone one, stop the hate completely, then I don't feel bad about trusting you. The collector clicked its mandibles. When my mission is complete and this world has entered the greater ranks of the collective, it will become whole. There will be no aberrant defections that lead to unnecessary divisions among your kind. And in the end, the unique, anomalous strength and lives of this world will fuel the great purpose to ensure that life remains infinite, said the collector. It continued. Tinkering species build monuments to themselves, spread themselves across planets and star systems to replicate themselves, but in the end, they will never be infinite. They will exhaust their resources and the energy. The cold of entropy will take them, and in all their warring and discord among each other, they will never manage to stand against the inevitable darkness. But the collective will be beyond this. The fundamental principle beyond all evolution is the propagation of one species. In the scale of the collective, this is the continuation of life, and for this purpose, it will evolve, absorb, and grow to no end. Once the collective has inducted enough life across the stars within its being at a sufficiently grand scale, it will fulfill the great purpose. The processing power of life united as one will surely stand against the darkness. Break the inevitable approach of heat death that otherwise comes for us all, tinkerer or hive unit alike. Wow, said the demon. I don't understand all of what you're saying, but the feeling I get the feeling of being a part of something big and important. Being special. Will I be a part of this too? Even if I'm broken like I am now? There is no doubt, declared the collector. The information you have provided me so far has been of great worth, contributing significantly to my survival and further planning. For this, you shall be immortalized within the ranks of the collective with as much honor as the true warriors I have devoured. I'm worth something. And I won't be broken anymore. The female specimen nodded to herself, the tiniest hint of a smile tugging at the corner of her lips, though in an awkward, stilted fashion, the muscles for smiling having never been used in years. She blinked as she tensed up, and the collector stopped its movement in an efficient instant, a rush of wind blowing past it as it halted from high speeds. I can sense something off. The ley lines, said the demon as she hovered in front of the collector. They are warped. The mana swirling through them, through the land, is circling, spiraling in one point. The dungeon, said the collector as it clicked its mandibles and unsheathed its monomolecular edge claws. They clinked out from its fingertips, growing now to 20-centimeter lengths. It sensed there were insects around it, and, as the demon noted as it focused mana into its eyes to make them more sensitive to the flow of magic. It could see what she was talking about. Its vision became tinted in light blue as it inspected the area around it. Lines of mana circulated throughout the land, ley lines as they were called, and these bright blue streaks poured out from the earth and danced over the grass and twirled around the trees. Yet, the collector had not been able to discern any significance from these flows, merely that they supported life in some way. However, when prompted by the demon, it now knew what to look for. It could see that in the seemingly random mass of flowing lines, there was now a pattern. A slight swirl, more a tendency of the lines to break and move away and into a central point a sizable distance away from them. And as its eyes sensed magic, its auditory systems sensed physical sounds. The clashing of hardened alloys breaking upon each other. Flesh rending. Bones breaking. The sounds of battle. Chapter 56, To Battle. The collector assessed itself and the environment around it. First, a check of its status before it engaged in what was perhaps its final battle. Metamorphosis level 6. Biomass level, 67 100ths. Stored genetic material. Black ant. Deer. Black hobgoblin. Human. Lesser oni. Frostborn hobgoblin. Horse. Lesser great centipede. Lesser great beetle. Spitting great beetle. Leafblade insect. Frostborn hobgoblin thrall. Vineswinger goblin champion core. Adaptations. Internal systems. Ultrafiber muscles rank 6.4. Minus coil boosters. Autonomic neuro-bodily matrix. Minus metalloglottic ossifier. Minus lightstone. Minus runewood. External systems. Sensitive hairs rank 5.2. Minus quill spray. Organic hyperalloy carapace rank 5.4. Minus longcane chitinous sublayer. Weapon systems. Monomolecular claws rank 4.4. Pyrocatalytic glands rank 3. Current form. Assassin bugroot / demon / dullscale rohu jumping araka. Magic. Status. Mana level, 100%. Active cores 3/3. Prime core. Minus trigger, desire. Demon core. Minus trigger, wonder. Frostborn thrall core. Minus trigger, greed. Inhura. Sapia demon core. Ethera. Devourer prime core. Primal magic. Bone binding frostborn thrall core. Blessings. Blessing of Mount Oi. Primal density, 5%. Root consumption limit, 100%. The collector had slotted in the frostborn hobgoblin thrall's core into its third slot on the way here, for if the collector was to interface with the potential warp gate in the dungeon, then it would require the thrall's energy signatures. Slotting in a core was possible without a full metamorphosis, but modifying cores and replacing them would require the processing power of the evolutionary cocoon. The process of assuming the thrall's core was akin to regeneration. When it occurred, the collector had felt another heart growing within itself, this time located in its stomach area. This meant there were now 3 hearts pumping within the collector, and all of them linked to separate cores and operating a portion of its spirit roots. Its prime core was responsible for the functions of 60% of its roots, and the remaining 40% split among the demon and thrall cores. Must take care to shield the prime core at all costs, noted the collector, for though it would survive having its main heart destroyed, it would severely compromise its magical abilities and deactivate powers from its secondary cores as well. If the collector had wanted to maximize its strength, it would have slotted in the Vineswinger goblin champion's core, for it possessed an Inhura called Wind Up that allowed a limb to charge up power after undergoing full rotations, but the thrall's core was crucial to tap into the warp and could be useful in its own way. The collector had noticed for some time now that insects from the deadwood were anomalously quiet, refraining from their usual indiscriminate feasting of each other on the forest floor. Instead, as the collector now neared the site of battle, the dungeon, it analyzed that the insectoids in the vicinity of the dungeon were all moving out towards the center of battle. A whole swarm of them from every direction. Insectoids of all kinds and sizes. An unending wave of chittering, many-legged creatures that shambled forwards, utterly ignoring the collector and the demon specimen behind it. Only the Araka were absent from this writhing mass unified in forward-moving purpose. The collector noticed the lanky, dark green form of a leaf-blade insect scamper beside the collector, its long antennae twitching as its oversized, scythe-like front legs flared out in front of it. It was larger than the smaller masses beneath it, the same kind the collector had taken enough note of to consume before. The collector backhanded the insect's head, blowing it away with the strike. Now headless, the insect twitched as it still stood upright, the last remnants of its neural functioning fading away. The collector activated the trigger of the thrall's core. Greed. This, the collector could approximate. It was similar in nature to its own trigger of desire, simply a little less focused in its scope and more brutish at its base. A pulse of faint blue energy spread throughout the collector's ashen body from its stomach. It punched into the leaf-blade insect's stomach, cracking through the carapace and into the mushy innards within. Bone binding. The primal magic of the thrall. By binding the essence of a creature down to a remnant of it, the bones, the collector could theoretically utilize the bones to manifest physical phenomena related to the creature itself. The collector activated the magic knowing that the insect possessed no biological structure like the bones that the thrall utilized. The closest analogous structure would be the carapace. Yet, the collector still tried in experimentation, wishing to scope out the limits of this ability. A pale blue light flickered from within the insect, generating outwards from the collector's fist still stuck inside of it, but nothing more happened. The collector clicked its mandibles. Combat data for bone binding updated. It would seem that without a bone structure at least somewhat compatible with mammalian forms, bone binding would not work. It instead made final use of the corpse by feasting upon it. Biomass gained +2. Biomass level, 69/100. So many monsters, said the female as she hovered above the collector, eyeing down at the endless march of insectoids below. The collector infused magical energy into its eyes and observed the insects. It beheld faint tethers of mana from all of them joining in the larger swirls of blue leading into the dungeon. This dungeon possesses the means to call upon specimen living in the biome surrounding it, noted the collector. A principle similar in fashion to the hive mind's mass control of units, and yet drastically more primitive and unrefined in its processing. Good. The mass movement of insectoids would provide adequate cover. And likely, the Araka resisted this call to action, for they formed their own rudimentary hive mind with each other. Thus, only the weakest of the insects in the forest mobilized. And, judging from their lack of aggression to the collector and the demon specimen, they were called to engage in battle with other targets. The collector heard further sounds of battle. The sound of a fire roaring. This one was loud enough for the collector to utilize its auditory systems to approximate a location. 115 meters ahead. Margin of error 10 meters. Judging from the sounds emanating from that location, particularly the clang of metal against carapace and other hard surfaces, it was highly likely there were tinkering humanoid presences ahead. The cover of the forest extended only a dozen meters ahead, as evidenced by the glow of lightstone torches visible ahead, demarcating the perimeter of the main goblin encampment. But this was range enough for the collector make visual confirmation of the battle, the humanoids, and assess a combat plan. Prepare yourself for battle, said the collector to the demon. If you truly wish to serve the collective, to play a part in its dawning, then you will fight as the predator you are meant to be and are becoming. The demon took in several deep breaths, a method of easing rising mental anxiety. She nodded, her eyes flashing purple. Got it. Equals. In the center of a sea of clicking, wriggling, writhing shelled bodies, 3 adventurers stood. A man on the taller side with conventionally handsome and rugged features. Square jaw, a head of full, slicked back black hair and surprisingly soft brown eyes. A scar ran from one eye to the chin that conveniently missed the lips, adding to his looks rather than disfiguring them. Solid build, but not overly muscled. A body meant more for functional fitness, and the man exhibited just that as he backflipped with a grace like flowing water. Where he had been but a moment ago, a club head of ice crashed, gouging out a small crater in the forest floor. Stop running! Shouted a muscle-bound, pale-skinned frost-born hobgoblin as he picked his Everfrost club up. To any ordinary human or even any 1- or 2-star adventurer, a trained hobgoblin with a weapon was quite the foe. But to Furio, newly anointed 4-star adventurer and a rising talent in the adventuring community, this was nothing. Furio gripped his Ethera construct, a wrench almost 2 meters long, in both hands like a spear. A longsword gleaming with an orange tint lay stuck with invisible force to the head of the wrench, turning the whole thing into a makeshift spear of sorts. And why don't you stop talking? Said Furio. He smiled as he parried the hobgoblin's second attack, angling his wrench above his head precisely so that the club's impact diffused away to the side, sending the hobgoblin off balance as his club crashed into the ground beside Furio. As the hobgoblin faltered, Furio took a step back to get into striking range, and then in one swift motion that left an arc of gleaming orange light in the air, sliced forwards with his wrench spear. The hobgoblin stilled before he fell to the ground, a massive, burning gash almost bisecting him from the stomach. Chapter 57, New Adventurers. That's the last of the goblins, said Furio as he twirled the wrench between his hands. The enchanted sword stuck to its head glowed fiercely, sending out arcs of fire that torched and blew back the various insect monsters that tried to swarm him. A few unlucky insects caught in the blade's path split apart before burning up rapidly, disintegrating into nothing but piles of ashes. "Bug duty, Emmy, please," complained Furio. "Is that any way to talk to your precious little sister?" said Emmy. She was much shorter than her brother, but no less lacking in fierce battle will. She stuck her staff of steely metal into the ground, the sharp, glaive-like head crashing into a beetle. She twisted the staff, crunching the glaive through the beetle and ending its wriggling. "She's right, you know," said Vera, third member of the party. Light and athletic build wrapped in form-fitting, layered leather armor. On the breast of her sleeveless leather vest was an emblem with 3 stars stitched within it. Her face was covered in a hood and veil that glowed a slight shade of iridescent rainbow from the magical light emanating from her arms. Rainbow circuits ran from her fingers all the way up to her shoulders. "Withdraw," said Vera. She reached a hand into empty space, and it sunk into a ripple in the air. From there, she withdrew a lengthy pipe of shingled bronze metal. "Judican artifacts make my skin crawl, made by heartless zealots as they are, but I really cannot deny they can be useful." She swayed her head from side to side, seeing the bugs approaching her, and Emmy flicked her veil to the side and breathed into the pipe. Her magical energy infused into the artifact, and a moment later, gouts of flame burst out from the other end of the pipe, washing over the bugs and burning them alive. She rotated her head, circling the flame around her and creating a ring of flame that kept the rest of the insects out for now. Furio, however, being physically the strongest and at the head of the party, did not enjoy this flaming barrier, and instead used his enchanted blade to cleave out space for himself. Though the orange blade had a fire-type monster's core enchanted in it, the flame was meant more to enhance its cutting edge, not to create large fires. More and more bugs started to near him, and though they were of zero threat to him, they still slowed him down and stopped him from seeing what was ahead. "I never get to voice an opinion in this party," said Furio. "But that's what I get for having a party made up of my little sister and girlfriend. Everyone told me it was going to be a disaster." "Oh, stop complaining," said Emilia. "Here, I'll help you out." With a grunt, Emilia took her glaive staff and slammed it into the dirt. A faint blue mana crystal glowed from within the glaive, focusing her magic as gray circuits emerged from her hands and ran up to her forearms. "Blade Storm," she chanted. Arcs of gray magical energy crackled around her, forming into 6 blades of metal that whirled around her at rapid speeds. She waved her staff towards Furio, and the rotating blades ejected towards him, pushing past the ring of fire and swerved around Furio, grinding up the insects clamoring at him into showers of innards and carapace. "Ugh," she said, her nose crinkling at the scent of insect innards. She looked down at the gut-soaked gray mantle covering her enchanted leather armor. On her mantle was an emblem with 2 stars upon it. "I hear there are public steam baths in Sunda. What I would give now to soak in one of them. Oh, I do like the sound of a public bath. Get clean and watch something nice. What's not to like?" Furio leered in front of him as insects began to amass in front of him again in a thick wall of carapaced bodies, but Emilia had cleared enough space for him to work with. "Here, I will activate Flam fully to clear a path," said Furio as he aimed his wrench forwards and then ejected the blade attached to the head at high speeds. The blade began to turn and spiral, unleashing the heat condensed at its edge and expanding it into large wreaths of fire that curled around it. The enchanted blade roared as flames surged up through its flight, toasting a mass of insects and clearing a straight path ahead. After traveling 50 meters, the blade stopped to a sudden halt, hovering in the air, the end of Furio's magnetic tether. Furio ran forwards in the clearing he had burned out, keeping his pace slower than usual to make sure Emilia and Vera could keep up. "Brother, you know you do have a lover, right?" said Emilia as she ran behind Furio. "What? I just look at other women and admire, you know, the artistry of their bodies. Like admiring a wonderful painting. Don't love them or anything. You know, Vera," said Furio. "Falling in love with you has been simultaneously the best and worst thing to happen to me. Some days, I don't know which part wins out, said Vera. You won't be thinking so hard once we clear this contract, said Furio as he peered ahead. Maybe a good sprint away was a yawning pit in the earth. Spikes of blackened wood arose around the hole, and from it, a faint blue light emanated. A dungeon. An unbound one, it seemed, and it had not had the time to grow and strengthen itself just yet with multiple territories. In other words, this dungeon was at its weakest state right now. Perfect to clear, and the weak level of monsters in this area meant that in all likelihood, this dungeon would not be too difficult for Furio, a 4-star adventurer, to deal with. Clearing a dungeon with just one party would net a huge bonus of coin for Furio, enough for him to buy his own place in Tallow. A nice place, too, not like those rusted-out hovels packed together on the lower rings of the city. Hovels he had spent years in with Emilia. Now, he finally had the strength to give her a life she was deserving of. A life that their parents, wherever they were in the afterlife, could smile upon. And a place worthy for Vera too, after all she had done, turning away even from her noble family to adventure with him. Don't get too hasty, said Vera as she put in short breaths into the Judican Flamebringer, shooting out balls of flame around Furio that discouraged any more insects from encroaching. We were supposed to merely investigate a surge of mana. This whole thing, an entire dungeon, this is beyond our expectations. We don't have a proper sorcerer of the order with us either to examine anything. We have no idea what we are getting into. Northern goblins and types from Sheen and Forays mean that there's a warper in the dungeon, and who knows what kind of monster that can bring in. Obviously, nothing too exciting. We have far gone past dealing with goblins, love. I could beat 4 champions at once, let alone the lot we have dealt with so far, said Furio. And besides, if we leave this unbound dungeon, things will just get worse. More and more monsters will come to it. There were already enough goblins here going on about invading before we took them out. We could portal back to the safe zone and wait for League reinforcements, but this dungeon is unbound. What if it moves? Or if the monsters decide to keep attacking? The village south of here has no protectors to it. Might take hours to get to it by foot, but if there's a warper, then maybe they can port there. The Sundan soldiers there have already been wiped out, and they would never be able to deal with something like this to begin with. We as adventurers have a duty to hold the line here. Or clear the dungeon too if we can. He reached the end of the 50 meters. Flam's activation had cleared out. The blade had lost its orange glow from activating, and he tapped it with his wrench, causing it to float above the wrench head. Switching to full me, said Furio. He reached behind his back to where 5 sheaths lay strapped and withdrew one of the blades, this one inside a pale blue sheath. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed the segmented blade in front of his wrench and then tapped it, causing the sword to slot into the wrench head with a click. The sword was smaller than Flam, and its ornamental design made up of spiked segments meant it was not great for face-to-face combat. But it was quite useful for this. Furio thrust out his wrench as the insects started to swarm again, and from the various spiked segments making up Fulmy, arcs of lightning emerged, coursing into the wall of bugs and using their bodies further as conduits. Electricity screamed as powerful currents of magical lightning seized up the wall of insects for a few seconds, causing their carapaces to crack and steam up before all of them exploded simultaneously in a sea of showering guts and shell. Furio twirled his wrench in front of him, blocking out most of the debris. Ag. Emilia spat out a piece of semi-charred insect flesh from her mouth. At least give us a warning. I did, Emmy, you just need to get faster. If you want to catch up to me, this is how fast you'll have to be, said Furio. You know minus, Emilia began before she yelped, a rock pelting the side of her head, passing through the flames. Vera blew out. Immediately, Vera rushed to her side. Are you okay, dear? I can bring out something to stem the hurt. Yes, I am fine, said Emilia as she shook her head. Just a small bruise, maybe. But where minus? There, said Furio. He had turned around the moment he heard his little sister cry out, and with focused senses, he spotted the culprit. A green-skinned goblin. A small one. It pranced up and down the heads of larger insects as ran away, a sling in its hands. Furio's expression darkened. He had thought he had dealt with all the goblins here. But he had been careless and left the smaller goblins around because he was in a rush to get into the dungeon. He cursed his carelessness and aimed the wrench at the tiny goblin's rapidly fading form. Fulmy ejected from the wrench at high speeds, shooting out and skewering the goblin. Furio span the wrench in his hands, and the sword still magnetically tethered to the wrench mirrored the movements, spinning around and tearing the goblin apart into pieces. "Sorry, Emmy. Sorry. That won't happen again," said Furio. "I promise." "You promise me way too much, brother." "Just focus on yourself," said Emilia. She smiled as she started to run again, towards Furio before something tore the legs from her body. Chapter 58, Spin. "Emmy!" Furio screamed as he immediately forgot about the gleaming entrance of the dungeon in front of him, at all the gold and glory it promised. He ran towards her, and his whole world became only his sister, at the blood starting to arc from her severed legs, but even this was not enough to fully dull his instincts. Almost automatically, he registered several things, the world almost slowing down as his mind raced. No enemies in near sight capable of doing this damage. A sudden blur of movement and the sound of solid physical impact. And, as he saw Emmy's legless body start to fall, an expression of surprise still on her face before it could register the pain, he saw shards of shattered rock behind her. A projectile attack. Someone or something was throwing rocks. We are what we train ourselves daily to be. We are our habits. Furio knew these words well from his master, and without a secondary thought, he projected his magical energy out in a sense field around him, all the while still running to Emmy's side. Something registered in his field. Projectiles. Large rocks headed towards himself and Vera, with another one following close behind to finish off Emmy. Not even a second had passed since Emmy first got hit. Whatever had thrown these objects could do so in mass volleys at pinpoint accuracies far beyond any Vineswinger goblin, and those monsters were known for their throwing arm. Furio reacted. He whirled around, reducing the range of his sense to move mana flow accelerating through his body, strengthening it. He had memorized the trajectory of the incoming projectiles, and in a quick motion, batted the air in front of him with his wrench. As predicted, a rock the size of a man's head crashed into the wrench, and Furio shaped the mana flowing through his wrench, his ethera and therefore extension of his body, into a spin that countered the ball's own and deflected it. With a pinging crack of impact, the deflected rock sailed backwards and crashed into the second stone meant for Emmy. Both rocks exploded out into a shower of pulverized rock pieces, such was the speed they had flown at. The rock meant for Vera smashed against her head, but it simply broke upon it like it was an indestructible surface. A flicker of rainbow light shimmered throughout Vera's body as her refraction spell, a spell cast on the body to negate the blow of one strong strike, faded. "Behind me," said Furio as he stood in front of Vera and Emmy. He heard Emmy's body hit the floor, and expected to hear her cries, but instead, she just breathed heavy, holding in her pain, trying to not make Furio worry. She could not speak, only gasp, and though she did not scream, every single heavy breath she took felt just like a scream to Furio. Furio gritted his teeth as he tried to figure out where the rocks had come from, his gray eyes darting from side to side as they saw only the endless expanse of bugs and shadowy forest trees. "Emmy, just hold on, okay? Big brother will make sure you get through this fine like I always do." He kept his hands tight on his wrench, eyes alight with mana as he projected his sense field again, ready to bat down any projectile. "It's okay, dear, it's okay," said Vera in a soothing voice as she used withdraw to pull out a vial of green liquid from a ripple in space. She popped open the cork with her thumb and held Emmy's shaking, paling face firm, opening her mouth and pouring in the liquid. Within moments, Emmy stopped her gasping, her breathing growing even as she fell asleep to prevent shock and reduce blood loss. "Vera, withdraw something to stop her bleeding," said Furio. An edge of anger sharpened his normally smooth voice. "And portal yourselves back to the safe zone. I am going to deal with this." "No minus," began Vera. "Yes." Furio's voice was firm. "You can channel to port us out one at a time, and you have to leave yourself for last. What do you think happens once I get ported out? You'll die. Vera, please, my love." He turned around to her to give her a smile. "I'll come back, I minus." In that moment, Furio swerved around, the hairs on his neck standing on end as he sensed another projectile speeding into the range of his sense aura. He shaped mana into his wrench again, predicted where the rock would be, and batted it away as well. With the correct amount of spinning mana wreathed on his wrench, he could prevent the rock from splintering and hitting Vera and Emmy behind him, instead knocking it high into the sky. "Just go." Furio batted away another rock. Imperfectly this time. It bounced off his wrench and curved behind him, dangerously reaching close to Vera and Emmy before just missing them and slamming into the earth with a cracking impact. Whatever was throwing these could also fine-tune and adjust the spin on the projectiles with incredible accuracy. Throwing skill beyond even any Vineswinger champion. This was a monster among monsters that an experienced 4-star adventurer should be dealing with, not Furio, who had been 4 stars for 3 days now. Furio took in a breath, calming himself. Breathe. Flow your mana. 30 seconds per port channel. 1 minute to hold out. He nodded to himself. Manageable. Equals. The collector clicked its mandibles as it held a rock between its hands. Purple mana infusing into its 2 demon eyes and 4 compound eyes as it extended its range of vision. It stayed behind the cover of several darkwood trees and thick undergrowth, using spin on its projectiles to swerve them past the trees to make their trajectory both unpredictable and to hide its location. The female demon specimen next to him plopped down 3 more rocks by his side, levitating them with her Sapia. Whenever the collector threw a projectile, she had also assisted by infusing some of her own Sapian force into it. With both their powers empowering the projectiles, the collector had expected to easily punch through these humanoids with thrown rocks, and indeed, it had made direct contact with 2 of them, fatally injuring one while the other seemingly possessed a means to mitigate the damage almost entirely even when struck at the head. The other one was troublesome. The male specimen. He possessed the speed, coordination, and grasp of spin to negate the collector's throws, though his grasp of spin was not so advanced that he could completely reverse engineer the throw and send it right back at the collector. A fortunate thing, in all likelihood, for if the male specimen had done so, the collector would have reflected the rock back again until one of them made a miscalculation, and in exceedingly high probability, it would not have been the collector. From observational analysis, the collector determined that the male specimen's eyes did not track the projectiles coming towards it. Instead, it seemed to be able to predict the trajectory of the projectile and strike at where it was to be. In that case, bring me another stone, said the collector as it opened a palm. Okay. The female demon floated a rock into its palm. Do you want me to boost it? No, this will be beyond your computational capacity for now. The collector wrapped the rock in its hands and applied crushing force, breaking the stone into many smaller pieces. It infused mana into them, drew its arm back, and then unleashed a concussive volley of spin-infused stone shards. The intent was to overwhelm the male specimen's capacity to react with a mass amount of projectiles. The male specimen reacted accordingly. This time, sensing a mass amount of smaller projectiles, he did not focus on batting them away but instead caused the sharpened chunk of metal, this sword atop what the collector recognized from other tinkerers as a wrench, to emit bolts of electrical output. The electricity arced into a field that destroyed the vast majority of the projectiles, for smaller as they were now, the electricity could immediately disintegrate them. Yet, not sufficient. One of the stone shards bypassed the male and struck true into the leg of the veiled female specimen. This time, she did not resist the projectile and reacted in signs of physiological distress, clutching at her bloodying leg. The collector had another rock ready in its hands, seeing if the male specimen would distract itself to attend to the female, but the male still faced forwards. Highly trained. The collector clicked its mandibles. Strong. If this male specimen were to fight the collector directly, the fight would be a desirable challenge. The collector felt desire tugging at its heart to face the specimen in direct combat. Yet, its prime directive to bring upon the dawn of the collective tugged back against its desire. Are you okay? Said the demon. A momentary error in processing, said the collector as it realized it had paused for a second. A second of wasted time. It clicked its mandibles, breaking apart another rock into small shards. It put in 1/2 of each pile into both its hands and drew the pile of stone back, ready to throw it, and this time, it infused within the 2 volleys a strong spin aiming to create a trajectory consisting of an extreme curve meant to bypass the male entirely, striking the female specimens behind it from the sides. The spins were opposite, meaning that 1/2 of the volley would break hard to the left and the other hard to the right. Unless the male specimen could be in 2 places at once, this would be fatal. Chapter 59, The Duel Eye. Furio could feel something was off with this volley. There had been a delay between it and the others. A small delay, one no more significant than a second, but in the realm of 4-star adventurers and monsters of the same caliber, such a shift would not go unnoticed. A stronger attack. A more varied one, perhaps. Regardless, Furio prepared by extending his sense aura out even farther, the mana flowing from his body in a circular field around him stretching to 20 meters in radius. As someone with a flow origin, Furio was naturally gifted with the movement of mana within and outside his body at both the micro and macro scales. Among 4-star adventurers, his sense aura was among the largest and most sensitive, picking up even the drop of a single snowflake in a raging blizzard. Furio registered movement at the edges of the field. Both edges. Countless small stone shards closing in from both the left and the right. He widened his eyes, but the surprise did not weigh him down. In adventuring, the unexpected was always near. The difference between a dead and live adventurer lay in adapting to it. Furio aimed his wrench towards one side of the volley and pushed out the electric dagger fulmy from his wrench. Then, he drove mana into his legs to use the common martial art dash. Green wrapped around his legs as he sprinted to the other volley, bolt-like arcs of magic screeching as steaming heat arose from the friction of his boots slamming into the dirt. Meanwhile, with a mental command, Furio activated Fulmy, and the 6 segments in the dagger opened up, revealing fleshy blue coils of muscle connecting the pale blue metal of the dagger. From the muscle fibers, lightning roared, destroying the volley. The other volley, though. Furio stood right in front of Vera and Emmy, facing his back towards the volley and hunching his form down to protect them as much as possible with his wider frame. He concentrated mana into his body with the martial art guard, turning his flesh hard like a demantite. Stone shards shattered on his back and pattered into the dirt in front of him, blowing up tiny craters and piles of dirt. Furio grimaced. The shards of rock had gouged out a patchwork of bloody, raw, and circular wounds all across his back, blasting through his durable metal weave tunic completely. No fatal hits, though. Furio's guard was not his strong suite. With an origin of flow, he specialized in the movement of mana, not in condensing it into single points. His dash was not great either for that reason. A fighter with a root or chaos origin was far better suited for those kinds of mana forms. Root with their stabler, more concentrated mana tendencies, and chaos with its more explosive flow that could be packed into shorter-lived but stronger forms. But no use crying over the talents he was born with. One could not be perfect at everything, after all. "Are you all right?" said Vera. She had light-wreathed hands on Emmy's unconscious figure, and from the brightness of the light, the portal to move Emmy out was basically done. Furio held down nausea as he saw Emmy's legs, severed at the knee, tied down with red-stained white cloth to stem blood loss. The pool of blood beneath her was already so big, so... He cleared his head, riding his battle will. "Take Emmy out." Vera nodded, and with a final burst of light shining from her hands that enveloped Emmy, sent her away. Little particles of shining rainbow floated all around the air. Furio turned around, facing the direction of the projectiles, for by now, judging from the flow of the spin infused in them, he had gained a sense of their origin. "And you go too. I'll meet you at the safe zone." Vera looked at Furio's bleeding back. "No, Furio, listen to me. If I portal you out to the safe zone, I can portal myself out without any channeling. That way, all 3 of us can survive. You think I'm going to lose?" Furio gripped his wrench tight. He tapped the wrench with one finger, willing Fulmy to magnetically latch back onto the wrench head. So far, there were no additional projectiles. Some breathing room. "No, Vera. You have portal yourself out. Fully, and to the safe zone. If you channel me out but leave yourself with just a short-range portal, you'll be stranded just a few minutes from here, if even that. Whatever this monster is, it's easily reaching a C-rank threat level, and we still have no idea what more it's capable of. If it's sensitive to portal movement, it could track you, kill you before you could even do anything. I have to be the last one here." Furio's eyes gleamed alight with mana and fury as he pinpointed the thicket of trees and undergrowth where the rocks came from. "And I'm going to fight. I'm going to make this monster suffer." "Furio, listen minus," began Vera. She sighed, knowing that when Furio let his emotions flare up and set his mind on something, there was no changing his mind. You're going to fight, no matter what. Then the least I can do is stop holding you back." Vera knelt to the ground, hugging her arms around herself. The rainbow circuits running up her arms shone bright, enveloping her in an iridescent haze before it faded, and with it, her physical form. A short-range portal. Probably, Vera would manually run back out of this forest. The remote Sundin village where the safe zone lay had no outposts, no professional healers, but hopefully the village healer would treat Emmy well enough to let her survive until adventuring reinforcements came. "Thanks for understanding, Vera," said Furio as he took in a breath, readying himself to fight. At the end of the day, Vera and Emmy both held him back. That was the simple truth of it. Though they could offer him some utility and support, Furio was leagues beyond them in power, and he essentially just carried them with him because of his bond for them. Even then, he sensed that it might not be enough here. Against this monster. If I don't make it back, I hope you end up with someone better for you. With that, Furio roared into the air, loosing out all the emotions he had pent up, the rage, the desire to hurt back what had hurt what was closest to him, and sprinted forwards. Without having to pace himself to make sure he did not leave behind Vera and Emmy, he was more than twice as fast as he was before. He used Floexel to boost his stats evenly, wrapping himself in a tight, full-body aura of green. He whirled the wrench like a spinning blade in front of him, activating Fulmi at low charge to wreath the weapon in arcs of damaging electricity as he mowed his way through the insects. Blue flashes of lightning decorated with flying insect legs, charred guts, broken carapace, and heads flew in the air behind him as he pressed forwards, always forwards, drenched completely in white and green blood and guts, only his bright, green-tinged eyes visible in the dark. The collector clicked its mandibles, gooey green juices dripping from its maw. It had prepared a pile of insectoid corpses beside it before unleashing its volleys, for this throwing maneuver was extremely costly in terms of mana consumption. The last twin volley had cost almost twice the amount of mana as a normal throw, leaving the collector significantly below half its mana reserves. But devouring these corpses would recharge its mana reserves, theoretically allowing for an infinite ranged bombardment. Yet, in the time the collector took to regain its mana, one of the female specimen had managed to create a smaller, localized warp to move the other, crippled female specimen from the battlefield. Then, she had removed herself in short order. Do most humanoids within the ranks of this organization known as the Adventurers League possess warp capabilities? Asked the collector. The female specimen behind it could not see as far as the collector and had been busy so far gathering insect corpses for it to consume, but she picked up on its intent and answered. No. Portals are the domain of Neva, goddess of paths, and those connected to her. The priestesses of the paths. They wear veils and have rainbow-colored circuits to symbolize the rainbow root that Neva waters and tends to. The collector clicked its mandibles, understanding that one of the female specimens fit under this category. However, with her gone, this male specimen was now left stranded. Certainly, he was the most physically and magically adept among them, surging with such energy that the collector's desire to feast upon his flesh and core only grew with every passing moment. Yet, what would this specimen do? Would it now flee? With its current physical and magical capabilities and the distance between himself and the collector, it certainly could. Such a choice would be prudent. Logical. And if he did so, the collector would simply move on to its initial goal of the dungeon. But no, the male specimen charged forwards, loosing a battle cry that roused the collector's desire to an even greater height. The collector clicked its mandibles, a red aura beginning to grow from around its white-plated body. The female demon sensed this burst of chaotic, powerful energy and shrank back instinctively, knowing a fight was to come. Excellent, remarked the collector to itself. You will provide me with an adequate final feast. It unsheathed its claws and started to flow mana around itself in preparation for battle. But it did not meet the male specimen's charge. Yet, you must overcome one more hurdle to prove worthy of my time. Chapter 60, The Duel 2. As the thick of Darkwood's forest growth, all those accursed black trees and twisted grasses and vines home to everything filthy that crawled, drew close to Furio, he powered mana into his legs, and with a final push, blasted himself forwards, right into the darkness. Insects all around him blew back from the force of the leap, some of the bugs directly beside his feet even blowing apart from the simple shockwave forced out from the movement. In a battle, a real fight where he had nothing to hold him back, the monsters of this area, all these bugs and goblins, were absolutely nothing to Furio, dying simply from the collateral damage of his movements. But as Furio sailed past 2 tree trunks and skidded down on dirt, he knew what he was about to face was something far, far beyond what this place was supposed to muster up. Visibility here was near zero, and simply generating light with his mana was inefficient. Furio focused his mana instead on maintaining a sense or a field around him, his senses adapting to the near-complete darkness by honing his hearing and touch instead. He did not overly engage the aura because there was so much interference here, so much random movement, instead only honing it enough to make up for his lost sight. And he was no stranger to darkness. Areas like this with no light were no stranger to adventurers, not to mention a 4-star one like him. Even as a relatively inexperienced 4-star adventurer, Furio still knew what it was like to fight in absolute darkness where no normal human could ever have survived. A week in an abandoned Talon mine dealing with Morians, mutated, curse-ridden and flesh-devouring humans, along with more overgrown bugs had taught him that much. It was where he first met Vera, too. He pushed down rising memories of the time, how he had argued so much with her when they got lost in the mines, how as the days passed, they realized they were similar threads wound from different cloths, his woolen, her silken. Emmy had not been there because she was sick, and he had to take the dangerous, multi-day mission to pay up enough coin for them and for a good healer. Vera was there adventuring to prove to her younger siblings that there was another life than the ones forced down their throats by her parents. Distractions. Furio gripped his wrench tight as he sensed movement. He tuned his senses so that it would ignore the chittering and crawling of the insects, and in doing so, he registered 2 unique auras and the physical bodies attached to them. One of them, massive, powerful, and of a kind he had never felt before, started to power up a sizable amount of mana as its physical form wound up a stone at him from behind a tree trunk. "That won't work on me. Not at this range where I can sense all of your movements," thought Furio as he powered up mana into his legs, turning them glowing green as he used dash, instantaneously rushing behind the tree trunk. Furio's eyes widened as his senses painted up the image of a monstrosity unlike any he had encountered in front of him. Almost 3 meters tall. Covered in what at first glance seemed like a full suit of white-plated armor lined with protruding spikes. A serpentine lower body. Enormous coils of muscle lining a human-like upper body that promised nothing but overwhelming force, and, as he sensed an inhuman face with 6 eyes and enormous horns, a likeliness that this thing would not hold back on using that power. Furio reacted on pure instinct, slashing his wrench horizontally across to gut the beast. Bolny was a short dagger with a coiled design unsuited for direct damage, but Flam, a longsword far deadlier, still orbited the wrench, and with his swing, the heated blade also mirrored the movement and arced forwards. The monster reacted with lightning-quick reflexes, swerving backwards with its serpentine body to dodge the swing by a hair's breadth and then undulated its body forwards in the very same motion, abusing its huge frame and range to unleash an enormous, red mana-infused punch. The hairs on Furio's neck stood on end as he sensed massive threat from the punch. He held up his wrench as a shield, infusing it in a sheet of mana to both absorb force and deflect the blow. If he was desperate or caught by more surprise, he would have had to use guard, and because his flow origin was unsuited to that type of defense, he likely would have sustained a near-fatal injury and gotten blown back. But Furio deflected the punch without much issue, and in the thick of melee combat, he could sense even greater that this monster was, well, a monster through and through. The armor plating it had on was not forged metal but pure carapace of a quality far, far higher than anything the Darkwood insects possessed. Furio would need some serious firepower to punch through that much carapace. Gah! Furio immediately pushed himself backwards as he felt pain stabbing from his side. He felt the warm rush of blood trickling down his ribs and he steadied his breathing. The monster had stabbed him with a series of spider-like legs that unfolded from its back in a sudden instant, surprising him. Though with his sharp reflexes, he had managed to avoid his lungs from getting punctured. Wounds deep enough to bleed, but not lethal. Furio could deal with this, but this monster. He sized it up again, taking in the huge, fluxing waves of mana pouring out from the creature, forming into a malevolent, red-tinted aura. A magical beast. Good. Furio had ways to deal with them. The older they were, the more primal density they had, the better. He just had to switch out weapons to Stella, but even with the anti-monster flail, he would find it difficult to punch through that much armor. Not to mention those spider legs. 6 different additional angles of attack. Fast reflexes. Speed and power. This monster was an absolute physical powerhouse. Oddly, though, he could not sense any true intent from it. It seemed to radiate a sense of calm. Killing intent, yes, but no real hate, no real powerful emotion. Then this thing must have been a familiar. A construct programmed for simple purposes. It did not match the profile of any monster he had known, and he had studied and memorized almost all that the Adventurers League had compiled information on down from the type of every single different variant of giant bug to the most unique and mighty draconids and millennial beasts. That meant the likelihood was high that this monster was custom-made. It looked like an amalgamation of different parts too. Part demon, even, which explained the second aura nearby. A demonic one. Though Furio had never encountered one in person, he had trained to sense their presences. That one must have been the master of this familiar. Furio sensed the monster attacking again. Furio powered up fully. The 6 segments of the coiled dagger opened up, and the blue flesh of the shockstripe eel embedded between the segments roared out a massive field of electricity. Furio did not hold back. He fully activated Fulmi as he shot it out from the wrench to buy space and time. The dagger whistled forwards, surrounded in an ever-growing field of arcing electricity that burnt up everything it touched, starting several fires. The League would berate him for causing a fire, but they would understand if he had to go all out against a C-rank threat like this. No, maybe even higher. C+, maybe. And a C-rank threat was already enough to threaten the lives of several villages, even a smaller town. The monster dodged to the side, and in that time, Furio slotted in Flam to his wrench and turned to the second presence hiding behind another tree, about 20 meters away. It stepped out just a little from its cover, bearing a shoulder, and he did not miss the chance. Furio ejected Flam from his wrench, and the blade blasted forwards like a shining orange missile in the dark. With dash, Furio followed quickly behind the blade's trajectory, and when he saw what he hit, his eyes widened for a moment. Flam stabbed into a young girl's shoulder, skewering right through and searing the wound around it. The force of the blade dragged the girl backwards several dozen meters until it pinned her to the thick trunk of another darkwood tree. Furio held down a pang of pity as he saw the demon girl, no older than what must have been 14, twist her face in pain and try to touch at the heated blade. The way she did not scream, it reminded Furio of Emmy. "Dispel your familiar, now!" shouted Furio. "And turn yourself into the League." He knew he should have killed her right then and there. There was no real crime in killing demons, for it had been years since they had left the common body where the common laws laid down by the gods for all races applied. But still, he could not muster the will up at the moment. A severe mistake. The demon girl's right arm lit up in purple, and Furio felt several rocks and branches slam against his chest. A surprising amount of force that he had not expected from someone as young as her, and he did not guard against it properly, spinning once in the air before he righted himself, landing on the forest floor 10 meters back. Furio turned around immediately, knowing he was close to the monster familiar again. He sensed it 11 meters ahead. A sizable distance, it had intentionally created space between itself and him. Disappointing, came a voice. Male in timbre. A smooth, well-enunciated voice that spoke Terran with perfect, conventional pronunciation bare of any accentation. Almost too perfect. A voice that did not belong to a monster, but more to an academic, though the deep, unnatural rattle underlining it foreshadowed an utterly inhuman side that would have made anyone's goosebumps stand at attention. Furio held down surprise. The monster spoke to him. A flash of purple from its left arm. If Furio remembered right, he knew this was Sapia, the Inhura of the demons, and yet, what were demonkind doing here? They were almost extinct. Their entire home realm of Zerl turned into an undead wasteland, and the remainder of their people scattered throughout the realms as desperate refugees or, in worst cases, as prisoners. The complete absurdity of the situation slowed Furio's reactions. Something from above came down. "Buck," said Furio as he found himself completely wrapped up in a web of silk. The monster had spun up a web somehow, lining it across the branches of the forest canopy, and lured Furio in deeper and deeper, abusing his emotional volatility to get him into this location to entrap him. The webbing was strong. Araka-grade silk, maybe even better. If he had just one arm free, he could have mustered up enough strength or willed another weapon out of his back to cut through. But he was completely immobilized, the webbing holding him in suspended animation from every limb. Furio grimaced, taking in a deep breath to make sure all his muscles were relaxed. There was only one way out. "Like the others, you consider me an anomaly beyond your reason, and thus, you relegate my presence to that of subordination. A familiar, as you would so call it. In essence, the creation of a tinkerer," said the monster as it drew near, all its many claws ready to butcher. "You wished to challenge me directly, and yet, when you surmised there was a path of least resistance available to disable me, you discarded the opportunity to engage in glorious combat. You are as pathetic as the vast majority of your kind, degenerated human, and you will find far better purpose within the collective." Chapter 61, The Duel 3. Furio listened to the monster. An intelligent monster. Not a familiar, then, for they had no free wills, especially if they were constructed from the ground up. At the same time, the presence of this creature, this thing seemed so improbable. It seemed at face value to be like a demon, And yet, it was a monster. Demons were not monsters, they did not have presences like this. They were of the common races, or they used to be, before their kind rebelled. No matter how demons looked or how reviled they were not monsters. Furio heard a heavy body part dirt and leaves as it slithered towards him. The creature's 6 eyes gazed at him with palpable disdain this time, though not an emotion so strong it would interfere with its decision-making. It was more the kind of disdain anyone would have for a cockroach, something far, far beneath them. Disgusting enough to evoke a reaction, not an emotion. This was a monster, there was no doubt about it. It stared down at Furio with an intent common across monster kind, hunger. No doubt, it had taken countless common lives already. From the very beginning, monsters had always been against the common races and the gods. A dichotomy marked across 2 entire millennia, ever since the convergence, maybe more time than that. There was no overlap between them. No monster would ever ally with a demon. No demon would ever consort with a monster. But did that matter in the end? What mattered was that right now, right here, this monster had hurt Emmy, and Furio was not going to stop until it was dead, no matter what it cost. You can think. You can speak, said Furio. He smiled to himself as he charged up magical energy around him, coalescing it around one of the blades sheathed at his back. A broad, rectangular-shaped blade. Good. Then you'll understand me when I say I'm going to make you pay for the lives you've stolen. Stolen. The monster observed Furio and clicked the mandibles poised on the sides of its smooth helmet of carapace. I have granted your kind and their meager existences greater purpose, regardless of the resistance they levy against me. But you will not understand. None of your unevolved kind will. Only in consumption shall you truly grasp what you lack. As the monster began to move, Furio activated Yolgu, one of his 5 core-forged blades. The rectangular blade, a dodao as it was called in the realm of Sheen where it was forged with the core of a shaker fish, unleashed its signature ability of calling upon the fish's own power of shaking the very earth itself. Tremors began to echo from the blade, and the rectangular clay sheath containing it shattered, revealing the thick, heavy-set brown blade lined with plate-like scales. The scales all shook rapidly, generating countless powerful shockwaves. Furio gritted his teeth and closed his eyes. Yolgu needed a channeling point to unleash its destructive area of effect shockwaves. He usually struck it into the ground to shatter the earth or swung the bat-like sword into monsters, blowing them apart from the inside out. But Furio was completely immobilized right now. That left him with only one point of contact to channel Yolgu, himself. Using his own body as a conduit, he let the powerful shockwaves pass through him, traveling into his feet where they blew apart the earth in great, seismic booms. Countless cracks wreathed his metal-weave clothing. The emblem on his shoulder emblazoned with 4 stars tore apart. The shining gold of the stars shattered into faint particles the darkwood swallowed up in an instant. The rest of the sheaths tied to Furio's back shattered as well, unleashing all of his weapons at once. This was a genuine, localized earthquake, and the range extended far past Furio himself. Cracks lined the ground around him as dirt rose up in huge geysers. When the shockwaves roamed past the webbing covering Furio, the mass amounts of silk shook for a second before splitting apart all at once. The monster halted its charge, escaping blowback from the shockwaves and slithering backwards, eyeing Furio. Furio coughed up blood as he struggled to keep himself standing. Around his wrench floated the 3 weapons that were on his back, Stella the monster-killing flail, Yolgu the earth-shaking blade, and Idapu the sickle sword of the winds. He could still fight. With flow as an origin, years of training, and an abundance of natural talent, he had managed to do what was seemingly impossible, flow the shockwaves of damage through his body, passing it perfectly through him and into the ground. This was dispersal, an advanced technique that only 5-star adventurers and above began to learn, but Furio managed an imperfect version through sheer desperation and natural talent. Still, imperfect was imperfect. Furio felt pain burning through his entire body, sheathing every inch of him in red-hot heat that told him he was breaking down. There were micro-tears across almost all his muscles. Some small fractures in various bones. Internal bleeding. Furio's vision blurred as he felt blood pour from his nose. Thank the gods he did not suffer from a concussion. At the edge of his hazy vision, he felt the immense presence of the monster disappear. Reacting on pure survival instinct, he tapped his wrench. He had shot fully into the forest to distract the monster, and now it came back to the wrench still screaming, covered in a sphere of destructive electricity. The monster immediately sensed the approach of the weapon and leapt into the air with a push of its tail, purple lining its form as it pushed itself back with telekinetic force, dodging over Fulmy and landing with acrobatic grace on the forest floor. Fulmy slotted back into Furio's wrench, and the dagger stopped its activation, the lightning fading as its segments closed and twisted on itself. It would take some time before it could be activated again. He dislotted Fulmy, and the dagger started to float around the wrench in an orbit, joining its brethren. Furio slotted in Stella, jamming the wrench into the head of the flail, a star-shaped construct with its four-pointed, fang-like ends wrapped around an orb of gleaming light. The light of a firefly. You inflict great damage upon your innards in order for a mere chance to move, said the monster as it clicked its mandibles, slithering around Furio and analyzing him. Furio was ready to react at any given moment's notice to react against the monster if it attacked, and the monster knew this. It simply took this small amount of time sizing him up to say what it wished. Perhaps in some small measure, my initial assessment of your worth was miscalculated. There is yet chance for you to prove your worth. In this small purchase of freedom bought at the cost of your body, what will you choose? To fight? Or to flee? Run. What a sick joke. Furio spat out blood and righted himself, getting his breathing under control and flowing his mana around him through Ixal. Using Ixal and constantly pumping mana through his body would drain his reserves, but if he did not use Ixal right now to keep his damaged moving with the help of mana flow, he would stop moving entirely. At least with Ixal, even if he had limited time, he could still use it to fight. He steadied his wrench, Stella's star head now hanging from its end with a golden chain of solidified light. 3 other weapons orbited the wrench, ready to be shot out at a moment's notice. Blam was still out in the woods, pinning the demon girl down. He would keep it there for now. And beyond his weapons, his will still stood strong and sharp. He shouted as blood spattered from each of his enunciations. I am Furio Nil, 4-star adventurer, and though I myself have no family name to speak of, I swear by all the families you threaten that I will slay you. Chapter 62. The Duel IV. The monster clicked its mandibles, nodding in some kind of warped appreciation before it focused on Stella, almost as if beckoning Furio to show what the weapon could do. With that, Furio took the initiative. He powered up Stella, and the light emanating from its core shone intensely bright, easily overpowering the dark woods and shining the light of what seemed like the sun for the first time in centuries in the shadowy forest. He began to rotate his wrench, swinging the flail head rapidly around him. The head blurred into a comet-like streak of gold, and every single insect in the vicinity moved away in primordial fear, for Stella was crafted from a relative of the Shinchu, a millennial beast hailing from Sheen that deviated from other monsters in that it existed only to devour other monsters. It was said that the Shinchu, a monstrous moth the size of a mountain, would consume 5,000 monsters in the morning, then 5,000 more at night. But Furio did not have the means to possess a core-forged weapon from a true millennial beast. No, this was from a much weaker relative, a Firefly variant, and yet, it was still powerful enough to put down even B-ranked monsters. For monsters grew stronger with age. The older they were, the more they feasted and grew and the more their primal density accumulated. Stella completely circumvented that defense, dealing exponentially more damage the higher a monster's age and primal density was. And there was no doubt about this. This monster must have possessed a great degree of primal density and age. Intelligence was one of the main markers of a strong, aged beast, and Furio could tell from its speech and its eyes, those ever-moving, ever-analyzing eyes, that this thing was highly intelligent. One strike from Stella, and this monster would blow apart from the inside out. Furio swung the flail at the monster, and the golden chain clinked and rattled as the shining flail head soared out. The monster evaded, using Ixal of its own to enhance its movements. Furio could not believe this. Ixal was nothing special. One of the first and most basic mana forms out there. Even monsters could use it to a degree as it was highly intuitive to just push mana into the body to boost power, but it was in the basics where technique showed the greatest differences. The gap in efficiency between the Ixal of a master martial artist and a beginner was like that between the dirt and the sky. And there was no doubt about this, even with a red origin of chaos, a mana affinity that was hard to keep under consistent control, this monster's Ixal with its smooth, controlled form, the stability of the flickering red aura that wrapped so evenly around the monster's muscle-bound figure, reached the level of a veteran fighter. Furio swallowed down his disbelief and sped up his own Ixal, manipulating the wrench with the slightest of movements to push the flail head up or down, tracking the monster. With each rotation of the flail around himself, It sped up, and by now, the power. A darkwood tree trunk, a massive thing that must have had a diameter approaching 5 meters, groaned as the flail cut straight through it as if it had never existed at all, slicing the thing apart and collapsing it. Countless insects on the forest floor burned apart, exploding as the mere light of Stella, not even the head itself, grazed them. But the monster kept up with Furio's top speed. Furio eyed the monster intently, with every passing moment marked by the whoosh of the flail and the clink of its chain spinning around him and lashing out at the monster, aiming at the head or heart with precision. The monster evaded with expert movements. It craned its body to the side to avoid overhead blows. It flattened itself to the ground to dodge decapitating sweeps. It slithered low and punched itself off the ground to escape swings meant to slice off its tail, and then in the very same moment, shrunk its muscles and twirled in the air to dodge another strike meant to try and strike it in mid-air when it was supposed to be less maneuverable. All movements boosted with Excel, and the movements themselves were fundamentally efficient and masterful. Despite this thing being a monster, the movements, they reminded Furio of a martial artist. A master of a craft. An artisan. As a martial artist himself, Furio had to quell a sense of pure admiration, to shove down a repulsive notion that he was witnessing art unfolding before his eyes painted up by a body monstrous and inhuman, a body that was never meant to practice martial arts. In just 3 seconds, Furio had attacked nearly 30 times, slicing down 3 enormous trees and carving out countless lines of burning gold on the forest floor, but the monster remained unscathed. Furio assessed the monster. It did not waste mana by expending it out of its body in the form of a sense aura to try and predict Stella's trajectories. It instead seemed to have another way of superhumanly predicting the flail's movements, allowing it to focus its mana solely on empowering its body. What it was, Furio did not know, but he just needed one strike, and he was willing to sacrifice anything to get that one blow in. He turned up his Ixal even higher. Blood poured from his mouth, nose, and even eyes, and every single one of his damaged muscles and bones creaked as they pushed themselves beyond their limits. There was no point saving anything now. He would tire out before the monster did, and when he could no longer keep up this speed, the monster would have a chance to move in and strike. The monster sensed the immediate shift in Furio's output. Both of its arms flashed purple as it stared at the incoming head of the flail. Furio knew what this was. A Sapian force attack. Force hold. He smiled. He knew it would not work. The monster seemingly did not know this, but core-forged weapons were almost like ethera constructs. They were extensions of their wielder's own body. The mana that flowed from the wielder flowed too into the core-forged weapons, and so any direct attempted manipulation on them was highly ineffective. And at Furio's current speed that reached beyond his limits, even one wasted movement meant the monster would suffer a hit. Furio suppressed the urge to keep his burning, bloody eyes from blinking as he saw the shining flail slam into the creature's armored chest.